The Jewish Maiden. In a charity school among the children sat a little Jewish girl. She was a good, intelligent child and very quick at her lessons, but the scripture lesson class she was not allowed to join, for this was a Christian school. During the hour of this lesson, the Jewish girl was allowed to learn her geography, or to work her sum for the next day, and when her geography lesson was perfect, the book remained open before her. But she read not another word, for she sat silently listening to the words of the Christian teacher. He soon became aware that the little one was paying more attention to what he said than most of the other children. "Read your book, Sarah," he said to her gently, but again and again he saw her dark, beaming eyes fixed upon him. And once, when he asked her a question, she could answer him even better than the other children. She had not only heard, but understood his words and pondered them in her heart. Her father, a poor but honest man, had placed his daughter at the school on the conditions that she should not be instructed in the Christian faith. But it might have caused confusion, or raised discontent in the minds of the other children if she had been sent out of the room, so she remained. And now it was evident this could not go on. The teacher went to her father and advised him to remove his daughter from the school, or to allow her to become a Christian. "I cannot any longer be an idle spectator of those beaming eyes, which express such a deep and earnest longing for the words of the gospel," said he. Then the father burst into tears. "I know very little of the law of my fathers," said he, "but Sarah's mother was firm in her belief as a daughter of Israel, and I vowed to her on her deathbed that our child should never be baptized. I must keep my vow. It is to me even as a covenant with God himself." And so the little Jewish girl left the Christian school. Years rolled by. In one of the smallest provincial towns, in a humble household, lived a poor maiden of the Jewish faith as a servant. Her hair was black as ebony, her eye dark as night, yet full of light and brilliancy so peculiar to the daughters of the East. It was Sarah. The expression in the face of the grown-up maiden was still the same as when a child. She sat on the schoolroom form, listening with thoughtful eyes to the words of the Christian teacher. Every Sunday there sounded forth from a church close by the tones of an organ and the singing of the congregation. The Jewish girl heard them in the house where, industrious and faithful in all things, she performed her household duties. "Thou shalt keep the Sabbath holy," said the voice of the law in her heart, but her Sabbath was a working day among the Christians, which was a great trouble to her. And then, as the thought arose in her mind, "Does God reckon by days and hours?" Her conscience felt satisfied on this question, and she found it a comfort to her that on the Christian Sabbath she could have an hour for her own prayers undisturbed. The music and singing of the congregation sounded in her ears while at work in her kitchen, till the place itself became sacred to her. Then she would read in the Old Testament, that treasure and comfort to her people, and it was indeed the only scriptures she could read. Faithfully in her inmost thoughts had she kept the words of her father to her teacher when she left the school, and the vow he had made to her dying mother that she should never receive Christian baptism. The New Testament must remain to her a sealed book, and yet she knew a great deal of its teaching, and the sound of the gospel truths still lingered among the recollections of her childhood. One evening she was sitting in a corner of the dining room while her master read aloud. It was not the gospel he read, but an old story book. Therefore she might stay and listen to him. The story related that a Hungarian knight who had been taken prisoner by a Turkish pasha was most cruelly treated by him. He caused him to be yoked with his oxen to the plough, and driven with blows from the whip till the blood flowed, and he almost sunk with exhaustion and pain. The faithful wife of the knight at home gave up all her jewels, mortgaged her castle and land, and his friends raised large sums to make up the ransom demanded for his release, which was most enormously high. It was collected at last, and the knight released from slavery and misery. Sick and exhausted, he reached home. Ere long came another summons to a struggle with the foes of Christianity. The still living knight heard the sound. He could endure no more. He had neither peace nor rest. He caused himself to be lifted on his war-horse. The colour came into his cheeks, and his strength returned to him again as he went forth to battle and to victory. The very same pasha who had yoked him to the plough became his prisoner, and was dragged to a dungeon in the castle. But an hour had scarcely passed, when the knight stood before the captive pasha and inquired, "What do you suppose awaiteth thee?" "I know," replied the pasha, "retribution." "Yes, the retribution of a Christian," replied the knight. "The teaching of Christ, the teacher, commands us to forgive our enemies, to love our neighbours, for God is love. Depart in peace, return to thy home. I give thee back to thy loved ones, but in future be mild and humane to all who are in trouble." Then the prisoner burst into tears and exclaimed, "Oh, how could I imagine such mercy and forgiveness? I expected pain and torment. It seemed to me so sure that I took poison, which I secretly carried about me, and in a few hours its effects will destroy me. I must die. Nothing can save me. But before I die, explain to me the teaching which is so full of love and mercy, so great and godlike. Oh, that I may hear his teaching and die a Christian." And his prayer was granted. This was the legend which the master read out of the old storybook. Everyone in the house who was present listened and shared the pleasure. But Sarah, the Jewish girl, sitting so still in a corner, felt her heart burn with excitement. Great tears came into her shining dark eyes, and, with the same gentle piety with which she had once listened to the gospel while sitting on the form at school, she felt its grandeur now, and the tears rolled down her cheeks. Then the last words of her dying mother rose before her. "Let not my child become a Christian," and with them sounded in her heart the words of the law, "Honour thy father and thy mother." "I am not admitted among the Christians," she said. "They mock me as a Jewish girl. The neighbours' boys did so last Sunday, when I stood looking in through the open church door at the candles burning on the altar, and listening to the singing. Ever since I sat on the school bench, I have felt the power of Christianity, a power which, like a sunbeam, streams into my heart, however closely I may close my eyes against it. But I will not grieve thee, my mother, in thy grave. I will not be unfaithful to my father's vow. I will not read the Bible of the Christian. I have the God of my fathers, and in him I will trust." And again years passed by. Sarah's master died, and his widow found herself in such reduced circumstances that she wished to dismiss her servant maid. But Sarah refused to leave the house, and she became a true support in time of trouble, and kept the household together by working till late at night, with her busy hands, to earn their daily bread. Not a relative came forward to assist them, and the widow was confined to a sick bed for months, and grew weaker from day to day. Sarah worked hard, but contrived to spare time to amuse her and watch by the sick bed. She was gentle and pious, an angel of blessing in that house of poverty. "My Bible lies on the table yonder," said the sick woman one day to Sarah. "Read me something from it. The night appears so long, and my spirit thirsts to hear the word of God." And Sarah bowed her head. She took the book and folded her hand over the Bible of the Christians, and at last opened it and read to the sick woman. Tears stood in her eyes as she read, and they shone with brightness, for in her heart it was light. "Mother," she murmured, "thy child may not receive Christian baptism, nor be admitted into the congregation of Christian people. Thou hast so willed it, and I will respect thy command. We are therefore still united here on earth, but in the next world there will be a higher union, even with God himself, who leads and guides his people till death. He came down from heaven to earth to suffer for us, that we should bring forth the fruits of repentance. I understand it now. I know not how I learnt this truth, unless it is through the name of Christ." Yet she trembled as she pronounced the holy name. She struggled against these convictions of the truth of Christianity for some days, till one evening, while watching her mistress, she was suddenly taken very ill. Her limbs tottered under her, and she sank fainting by the bedside of the sick woman. "Poor Sarah," said the neighbours, "she is overcome with hard work and night watching." And then they carried her to the hospital for the sick poor. There she died, and they bore her to her resting place in the earth, but not to the churchyard of the Christians. There was no place for the Jewish girl, but they dug a grave for her outside the wall. And God's sun, which shines upon the graves of the churchyard of the Christians, also throws its beams on the grave of the Jewish maiden beyond the wall. And when the psalms of the Christians sound across the churchyard, their echo reaches her lonely resting place. And she who sleeps there will be counted worthy at the resurrection, through the name of Christ the Lord, who said to his disciples, "John baptized you with water, but I will baptize you with the Holy Ghost." The jumper, the flea, the grasshopper, and the skipjack once wanted to see which of them could jump highest, and they invited the whole world, and whoever else would come, to see the grand sight. And there the three famous jumpers were met together in the room. "Yes, I'll give my daughter to him who jumps highest," said the king, "for it would be mean to let these people jump for nothing." The flea stepped out first. He had very pretty manners, and bowed in all directions, for he had young ladies, blood in his veins, and was accustomed to consort only with human beings, and that was of great consequence. Then came the grasshopper. He was certainly much heavier, but he had a good figure, and wore the green uniform that was born with him. This person, moreover, maintained that he belonged to a very old family in the land of Egypt, and that he was highly esteemed there. He had just come from the field, he said, and had been put into a card house 3 stories high, and all made of picture cards with the figures turned inwards. There were doors and windows in the house, cut in the body of the Queen of Hearts. "I sing so," he said, "that 16 native crickets who have chirped from their youth up, and have never yet had a card house of their own, would become thinner than they are with envy if they were to hear me." The flea and the grasshopper took care to announce who they were, and that they considered themselves entitled to marry a princess. The skipjack said nothing, but it was said of him that he thought all the more, and directly the yard dog had smelt at him, he was ready to assert that the skipjack was of good family, and formed from the breastbone of an undoubted goose. The old counsellor, who had received 3 medals for holding his tongue, declared that the skipjack possessed the gift of prophecy. One could tell by his bones whether there would be a severe winter or a mild one, and that's more than one can always tell from the breastbone of the man who writes the almanac. "I shall not say anything more," said the old king. "I only go on quietly, and always think the best." Now they were to take their jump. The flea sprang so high that no one could see him, and then they asserted that he had not jumped at all. That was very mean. The grasshopper only sprang half as high, but he sprang straight into the king's face, and the king declared that was horribly rude. The skipjack stood a long time considering. At last people thought that he could not jump at all. "I only hope he's not become unwell," said the yard dog. And then he smote at him again. Tap! He sprang, with a little crooked jump, just into the lap of the princess, who sat on a low golden stool. Then the king said, "The highest leap was taken by him who jumped up to my daughter, for therein lies the point. But it requires head to achieve that, and the skipjack has shown that he has a head. And so he had the princess." "I jumped highest after all," said the flea, "but it's all the same. Let her have the goose-bone with its lump of wax and bit of stick. I jumped to the highest, but in this world a body is required if one wishes to be seen." And the flea went into foreign military service, where it is said he was killed. The grasshopper seated himself out in the ditch, and thought and considered how things happened in the world. And he too said, "Body is required, body is required." And then he sang his own melancholy song, and from that we have gathered this story, which they say is not true, though it's in print. The Last Dream of the Old Oak. In the forest, high up on the steep shore, and not far from the open seacoast, stood a very old oak tree. It was just 365 years old, but that long time was to the tree as the same number of days might be to us. We wake by day and sleep by night, and then we have our dreams. It is different with the tree. It is obliged to keep awake through 3 seasons of the year, and does not get any sleep till winter comes. Winter is its time for rest, its night after the long day of spring, summer, and autumn. On many a warm summer, the ephemera, the flies that exist for only a day, had fluttered about the old oak, enjoyed life and felt happy. And if, for a moment, one of the tiny creatures rested on one of his large, fresh leaves, the tree would always say, "Poor little creature, your whole life consists only of a single day. How very short. It must be quite melancholy." "Melancholy? What do you mean?" the little creature would always reply. "Everything around me is so wonderfully bright and warm and beautiful that it makes me joyous. But only for one day, and then it is all over." "Over," repeated the fly. "What is the meaning of all over? Are you all over too?" "No. I shall very likely live for thousands of your days, and my day is whole seasons long. Indeed, it is so long that you could never reckon it out." "No? Then I don't understand you. You may have thousands of my days, but I have thousands of moments in which I can be merry and happy. Does all the beauty of the world cease when you die?" "No," replied the tree. "It will certainly last much longer, infinitely longer than I can even think of." "Well then," said the little fly, "we had the same time to live, only we reckoned differently." And the little creature danced and floated in the air, rejoicing in her delicate wings of gauze and velvet, rejoicing in the balmy breezes, laden with the fragrance of clover fields and wild roses, elder blossoms and honeysuckle from the garden hedges, wild thyme, primroses, and mint. And the scent of all these was so strong that the perfume almost intoxicated the little fly. The long and beautiful day had been so full of joy and sweet delights that when the sun sank low it felt tired of all its happiness and enjoyment. Its wings could sustain it no longer, and gently and slowly it glided down upon the soft waving blades of grass, nodded its little head as well as it could nod, and slept peacefully and sweetly. The fly was dead. "Poor little ephemera," said the oak. "What a terribly short life." And so, on every summer day, the dance was repeated, the same questions asked, and the same answers given. The same thing was continued through many generations of ephemera. All of them felt equally merry and equally happy. The oak remained awake through the morning of spring, the noon of summer, and the evening of autumn. Its time of rest, its night drew nigh, winter was coming. Already the storms were singing, "Good night, good night. Here fell a leaf, and there fell a leaf. We will rock you and lull you. Go to sleep, go to sleep. We will sing you to sleep and shake you to sleep, and it will do your old twigs good. They will even crackle with pleasure. Sleep sweetly, sleep sweetly. It is your 365th night. Correctly speaking, you are but a youngster in the world. Sleep sweetly. The clouds will drop snow upon you, which will be quite a coverlid. Warm and sheltering to your feet. Sweet sleep to you, and pleasant dreams." And there stood the oak, stripped of all its leaves, left to rest during the whole of a long winter, and to dream many dreams of events that had happened in its life, as in the dreams of men. The great tree had once been small, indeed. In its cradle it had been an acorn. According to human computation, it was now in the 4th century of its existence. It was the largest and best tree in the forest. Its summit towered above all the other trees and could be seen far out at sea, so that it served as a landmark to the sailors. It had no idea how many eyes looked eagerly for it. In its topmost branches the wood pigeon built her nest, and the cuckoo carried out his usual vocal performances, and his well-known notes echoed amid the boughs, and in autumn, when the leaves looked like beaten copper plates, the birds of passage would come and rest upon the branches before taking their flight across the sea. But now it was winter. The tree stood leafless, so that everyone could see how crooked and bent were the branches that sprang forth from the trunk. Crows and rooks came by turns and sat on them, and talked of the hard times which were beginning, and how difficult it was in winter to obtain food. It was just about holy Christmas time that the tree dreamed a dream. The tree had, doubtless, a kind of feeling that the festive time had arrived, and in his dream fancied he heard the bells ringing from all the churches round. And yet it seemed to him to be a beautiful summer's day, mild and warm. His mighty summit was crowned with spreading fresh green foliage. The sunbeams played among the leaves and branches, and the air was full of fragrance from herb and blossom. Painted butterflies chased each other. The summer flies danced around him, as if the world had been created merely for them to dance and be merry in. All that had happened to the tree during every year of his life seemed to pass before him, as in a festive procession. He saw the knights of olden times and noble ladies ride by through the wood on their gallant steeds, with plumes waving in their hats and falcons on their wrists. The hunting horn sounded and the dogs barked. He saw hostile warriors in coloured dresses and glittering armour, with spear and halberd, pitching their tents and anon striking them. The watchfires again blazed, and men sang and slept under the hospitable shelter of the tree. He saw lovers meet in quiet happiness near him in the moonshine, and carve the initials of their names in the greyish-green bark on his trunk. Once, but long years had intervened since then. Guitars and Aeolian harps had been hung on his boughs by merry travellers. Now they seemed to hang there again, and he could hear their marvellous tones. The wood pigeons cooed as if to explain the feelings of the tree, and the cuckoo called out to tell him how many summer days he had yet to live. Then it seemed as if new life was thrilling through every fibre of root and stem and leaf, rising even to the highest branches. The tree felt itself stretching and spreading out, while through the root beneath the earth ran the warm vigour of life. As he grew higher and still higher with increased strength, his topmost boughs became broader and fuller, and in proportion to his growth, so was his self-satisfaction increased, and with it arose a joyous longing to grow higher and higher, to reach even to the warm, bright sun itself. Already had his topmost branches pierced the clouds, which floated beneath them like troops of birds of passage or large white swans. Every leaf seemed gifted with sight, as if it possessed eyes to see. The stars became visible in broad daylight, large and sparkling, like clear and gentle eyes. They recalled to the memory the well-known look in the eyes of a child, or in the eyes of lovers who had once met beneath the branches of the old oak. These were wonderful and happy moments for the old tree, full of peace and joy, and yet, amidst all this happiness, the tree felt a yearning, longing desire that all the other trees, bushes, herbs, and flowers beneath him might be able also to rise higher, as he had done, and to see all this splendor and experience the same happiness. The grand, majestic oak could not be quite happy in the midst of his enjoyment, while all the rest, both great and small, were not with him. And this feeling of yearning trembled through every branch, through every leaf, as warmly and fervently as if they had been the fibers of a human heart. The summit of the tree waved to and fro, and bent downwards as if in his silent longing he sought for something. Then there came to him the fragrance of thyme, followed by the more powerful scent of honeysuckle and violets, and he fancied he heard the note of the cuckoo. At length his longing was satisfied. Up through the clouds came the green summits of the forest trees, and beneath him the oak saw them rising, and growing higher and higher. Bush and herb shot upward, and some even tore themselves up by the roots to rise more quickly. The birch tree was the quickest of all. Like a lightning flash, the slender stem shot upwards in a zigzag line, the branches spreading around it like green gauze and banners. Every native of the wood, even to the brown and feathery rushes, grew with the rest, while the birds ascended with the melody of song. On a blade of grass that fluttered in the air like a long green ribbon sat a grasshopper, cleaning his wings with his legs. May beetles hummed, the bees murmured, the birds sang, each in his own way. The air was filled with the sounds of song and gladness. "But where is the little blue flower that grows by the water?" asked the oak, "and the purple bellflower, and the daisy?" You see, the oak wanted to have them all with him. "Here we are here," sounded in voice and song. "But the beautiful time of last summer, where is that? And the lilies of the valley, which last year covered the earth with their bloom? And the wild apple tree with its lovely blossoms, and all the glory of the wood, which has flourished year after year? Even what may have but now sprouted forth could be with us here." We are here, sounded voices higher in the air, as if they had flown there beforehand. "Why, this is beautiful, too beautiful to be believed," said the oak in a joyful tone. "I have them all here, both great and small. Not one has been forgotten. Can such happiness be imagined?" It seemed almost impossible. "In heaven with the eternal God, it can be imagined." "And it is possible," sounded the reply through the air. And the old tree, as it still grew upwards and onwards, felt that his roots were loosening themselves from the earth. "It is right so, it is best," said the tree. "No fetters hold me now. I can fly up to the very highest point in light and glory, and all I love are with me, both small and great. All are here." Such was the dream of the old oak, and while he dreamed, a mighty storm came rushing over land and sea at the holy Christmas time. The sea rolled in great billows towards the shore. There was a cracking and crushing heard in the tree. The root was torn from the ground just at the moment when in his dream he fancied it was being loosened from the earth. He fell. His 365 years were passed as the single day of the ephemera. On the morning of Christmas Day, when the sun rose, the storm had ceased. From all the churches sounded the festive bells, and from every hearth, even of the smallest hut, rose the smoke into the blue sky, like the smoke from the festive thank-offerings on the Druids' altars. The sea gradually became calm, and on board a great ship that had withstood the tempest during the night, all the flags were displayed as a token of joy and festivity. "The tree is down! The old oak, our landmark on the coast!" exclaimed the sailors. "It must have fallen in the storm of last night. Who can replace it? Alas, no one!" This was a funeral oration over the old tree, short but well meant. There it lay, stretched on the snow-covered shore, and over it sounded the notes of a song from the ship, a song of Christmas joy, and of the redemption of the soul of man, and of eternal life through Christ's atoning blood. "Sing aloud on the happy morn, all is fulfilled, for Christ is born. With songs of joy let us loudly sing hallelujahs to Christ our King." Thus sounded the old Christmas carol, and everyone on board the ship felt his thoughts elevated. Through the song and the prayer, even as the old tree had felt lifted up in its beautiful dream on that Christmas morn, the last peal. We are in a rich, happy house, where the master, the servants, the friends of the family are full of joy and felicity. For on this day a son and heir has been born, and mother and child are doing well. The lamp in the bedchamber had been partly shaded, and the windows were covered with heavy curtains of some costly silken material. The carpet was thick and soft, like a covering of moss. Everything invited to slumber. Everything had a charming look of repose, and so the nurse had discovered, for she slept, and well she might sleep, while everything around her told of happiness and blessing. The guardian angel of the house leaned against the head of the bed, while over the child was spread, as it were, a net of shining stars, and each star was a pearl of happiness. All the good stars of life had brought their gifts to the newly born. Here sparkled health, wealth, fortune, and love. In short, there seemed to be everything for which man could wish on earth. "Everything has been bestowed here," said the guardian angel. "No, not everything," said a voice near him, the voice of the good angel of the child. "One fairy has not yet brought her gift, but she will, even if years should elapse. She will bring her gift. It is the last pearl that is wanting." "Wanting!" cried the guardian angel. "Nothing must be wanting here, and if it is so, let us fetch it. Let us seek the powerful fairy. Let us go to her. She will come. She will come some day unsought. Her pearl must not be missing. It must be there, that the crown, when worn, may be complete." "Where is she to be found? Where does she dwell?" said the guardian angel. "Tell me, and I will procure the pearl." "Will you do that?" replied the good angel of the child. "Then I will lead you to her directly, wherever she may be. She has no abiding place. She rules in the palace of the emperor. Sometimes she enters the peasant's humble cot. She passes no one without leaving a trace of her presence. She brings her gift with her, whether it is a world or a bauble. To this child she must come. You think that to wait for this time would be long and useless. Well then, let us go for this pearl, the only one lacking amidst all this wealth." Then hand in hand they floated away to the spot where the fairy was now lingering. It was in a large house with dark windows and empty rooms, in which a peculiar stillness reigned. A whole row of windows stood open, so that the rude wind could enter at its pleasure, and the long white curtains waved to and fro in the current of air. In the centre of one of the rooms stood an open coffin, in which lay the body of a woman, still in the bloom of youth, and very beautiful. Fresh roses were scattered over her. the delicate folded hands, and the noble face glorified in death by the solemn, earnest look, which spoke of an entrance into a better world, were alone visible. Around the coffin stood the husband and children, a whole troop, the youngest in the father's arms. They were come to take a last farewell look of their mother. The husband kissed her hand, which now lay like a withered leaf, but which a short time before had been diligently employed in deeds of love for them all. Tears of sorrow rolled down their cheeks and fell in heavy drops on the floor, but not a word was spoken. The silence which reigned here expressed a world of grief. With silent steps, still sobbing, they left the room. A burning light remained in the room, and a long red wick rose far above the flame, which fluttered in the draught of air. Strange men came in and placed the lid of the coffin over the dead and drove the nails firmly in, while the blows of the hammer resounded through the house and echoed in the hearts that were bleeding. "Whither art thou leading me?" asked the guardian angel. "Here dwells no fairy whose pearl could be counted amongst the best gifts of life." "Yes, she is here in this sacred hour," replied the angel, pointing to a corner of the room, and there, where in her lifetime the mother had taken her seat amidst flowers and pictures, in that spot where she, like the blessed fairy of the house, had welcomed husband, children, and friends, and, like a sunbeam, had spread joy and cheerfulness around her, the centre and heart of them all, there, in that very spot, sat a strange woman, clothed in long flowing garments, and occupying the place of the dead wife and mother. It was the fairy, and her name was Sorrow. A hot tear rolled into her lap, and formed itself into a pearl, glowing with all the colours of the rainbow. The angel seized it. The pearl glittered like a star with sevenfold radiance. The pearl of sorrow, the last, which must not be wanting, increases the lustre, and explains the meaning of all the other pearls. Do you see the shimmer of the rainbow which unites earth to heaven? So has there been a bridge built between this world and the next. Through the night of the grave we gaze upwards beyond the stars to the end of all things. Then we glance at the pearl of sorrow, in which are concealed the wings which shall carry us away to eternal happiness. The little elder. Tree Mother. There was once a little boy who had caught cold. He had gone out and got wet feet. Nobody had the least idea how it had happened. The weather was quite dry. His mother undressed him, put him to bed, and ordered the teapot to be brought in, that she might make him a good cup of tea from the elder tree blossoms, which is so warming. At the same time, the kind-hearted old man who lived by himself in the upper story of the house came in. He led a lonely life, for he had no wife and children, but he loved the children of others very much, and he could tell so many fairy tales and stories that it was a pleasure to hear him. "Now drink your tea," said the mother. "Perhaps you will hear a story." "Yes, if I only knew a fresh one," said the old man, and nodded smilingly. "But how did the little fellow get his wet feet?" he then asked. "That," replied the mother, "nobody can understand." "Will you tell me a story?" asked the boy. "Yes, if you can tell me as nearly as possible how deep is the gutter in the little street where you go to school." "Just half as high as my top boots," replied the boy. "But then I must stand in the deepest holes." "There, now we know where you got your wet feet," said the old man. "I ought to tell you a story, but the worst of it is, I do not know any more." "You can make one up," said the little boy. "Mother says you can tell a fairy tale about anything you look at or touch." "That is all very well, but such tales or stories are worth nothing." "No, the right ones come by themselves and knock at my forehead saying, 'Here I am.'" "Will not one knock soon?" asked the boy. And the mother smiled while she put elder tree blossoms into the teapot and poured boiling water over them. "Pray, tell me a story." "Yes, if stories came by themselves. They are so proud they only come when they please." "But wait," he said suddenly, "there is one. Look at the teapot, there is a story in it now." And the little boy looked at the teapot. The lid rose up gradually. The elder tree blossoms sprang forth one by one, fresh and white. Long boughs came forth. Even out of the spout they grew up in all directions and formed a bush. Nay, a large elder tree, which stretched its branches up to the bed and pushed the curtains aside, and there were so many blossoms and such a sweet fragrance. In the midst of the tree sat a kindly-looking old woman with a strange dress. It was as green as the leaves, and trimmed with large white blossoms, so that it was difficult to say whether it was real cloth, or the leaves and blossoms of the elder tree. "What is this woman's name?" asked the little boy. "Well, the Romans and Greeks used to call her a dryad," said the old man. "But we do not understand that. Out in the sailors' quarter they give her a better name. There she is called Elder Tree Mother. Now, you must attentively listen to her and look at the beautiful elder tree. Just such a large tree, covered with flowers, stands out there. It grew in the corner of an humble little yard. Under this tree sat two old people one afternoon in the beautiful sunshine. He was an old sailor, and she his old wife. They had already great-grandchildren, and were soon to celebrate their golden wedding, but they could not remember the date, and the elder tree mother was sitting in the tree and looked as pleased as this one here. "I know very well when the golden wedding is to take place," she said, "but they did not hear it. They were talking of bygone days." "Well, do you remember?" said the old sailor. "When we were quite small and used to run about and play. It was in the very same yard where we now are. We used to put little branches into the ground and make a garden." "Yes," said the old woman, "I remember it very well. We used to water the branches, and one of them, an elder tree branch, took root and grew and became the large tree under which we are now sitting as old people." "Certainly you are right," he said. "And in yonder corner stood a large water tub. There I used to sail my boat, which I had cut out myself. It sailed so well, but soon I had to sail somewhere else. But first we went to school to learn something," she said, "and then we were confirmed. We both wept on that day, but in the afternoon we went out hand in hand, and ascended the high round tower, and looked out into the wide world right over Copenhagen and the sea. Then we walked to Fredericksburg, where the king and the queen were sailing about in their magnificent boat on the canals. But soon I had to sail about somewhere else, and for many years I was travelling about far away from home. And I often cried about you, for I was afraid lest you were drowned and lying at the bottom of the sea. Many a time I got up in the night and looked, if the weathercock had turned. It turned often, but you did not return. I remember one day distinctly. The rain was pouring down in torrents. The dustman had come to the house where I was in service. I went down with the dustbin and stood for a moment in the doorway and looked at the dreadful weather. Then the postman gave me a letter. It was from you. Heavens! How that letter had travelled about! I tore it open and read it. I cried and laughed at the same time, and was so happy. Therein was written that you were staying in the hot countries where the coffee grows. These must be marvellous countries. You said a great deal about them, and I read all while the rain was pouring down and I was standing there with the dustbin. Then suddenly someone put his arm round my waist. "Yes, and you gave him a hearty smack on the cheek," said the old man. "I did not know that it was you. You had come as quickly as your letter, and you looked so handsome, and so you do still. You had a large yellow silk handkerchief in your pocket and a shining hat on. You looked so well, and the weather in the street was horrible. Then we married, he said. Do you remember how we got our first boy, and then Mary, Niels, Peter, John, and Christian? Oh, yes. And now they have all grown up and have become useful members of society whom everybody cares for. And their children have had children again, said the old sailor. Yes, these are children's children, and they are strong and healthy. If I am not mistaken, our wedding took place at this season of the year. Yes, today is your golden wedding day, said the little elder tree mother, stretching her head down between the two old people, who thought that she was their neighbor, who was nodding to them. They looked at each other and clasped hands. Soon afterwards the children and grandchildren came, for they knew very well that it was the golden wedding day. They had already wished them joy and happiness in the morning, but the old people had forgotten it, although they remembered things so well that had passed many, many years ago. The elder tree smelt strongly, and the setting sun illuminated the faces of the two old people, so that they looked quite rosy. The youngest of the grandchildren danced round them, and cried merrily that there would be a feast in the evening, for they were to have hot potatoes. And the elder mother nodded in the tree and cried, "Hooray!" with the others. But that was no fairy tale, said the little boy who had listened to it. You will presently understand it, said the old man who told the story. Let us ask little elder tree mother about it. That was no fairy tale, said the little elder tree mother, but now it comes. Real life furnishes us with subjects for the most wonderful fairy tales, for otherwise my beautiful elder bush could not have grown forth out of the teapot. And then she took the little boy out of bed and placed him on her bosom. The elder branches, full of blossoms, closed over them. It was as if they sat in a thick, leafy bower which flew with them through the air. It was beautiful beyond all description. The little elder tree mother had suddenly become a charming young girl, but her dress was still of the same green material, covered with white blossoms as the elder tree mother had worn. She had a real elder blossom on her bosom, and a wreath of the same flowers was wound round her curly golden hair. Her eyes were so large and so blue that it was wonderful to look at them. She and the boy kissed each other, and then they were of the same age and felt the same joys. They walked hand in hand out of the bower and now stood at home in a beautiful flower garden. Near the green lawn, the father's walking stick was tied to a post. There was life in this stick for the little ones, for as soon as they seated themselves upon it, the polished knob turned into a neighing horse's head. A long black mane was fluttering in the wind, and 4 strong, slender legs grew out. The animal was fiery and spirited. They galloped round the lawn. "Hooray! Now we shall ride far away, many miles," said the boy. "We shall ride to the nobleman's estate where we were last year." And they rode round the lawn again, and the little girl, who, as we know, was no other than the little elder tree mother, continually cried, "Now we are in the country. Do you see the farmhouse there, with the large baking stove, which projects like a gigantic egg out of the wall into the road? The elder tree spreads its branches over it, and the cock struts about and scratches for the hens. Look how proud he is. Now we are near the church. It stands on a high hill, under the spreading oak trees. One of them is half dead. Now we are at the smithy, where the fire roars, and the half-naked men beat with their hammers, so that the sparks fly far and wide. Let's be off to the beautiful farm." And they pass by everything. The little girl, who was sitting behind on the stick, described, and the boys saw it, and yet they only went round the lawn. Then they played in a sidewalk, and marked out a little garden on the ground. She took elder blossoms out of her hair and planted them, and they grew exactly like those the old people planted when they were children, as we have heard before. They walked about hand in hand, just as the old couple had done when they were little, but they did not go to the Round Tower nor to the Frederiksberg Garden. No, the little girl seized the boy round the waist, and then they flew far into the country. It was spring, and it became summer. It was autumn, and it became winter, and thousands of pictures reflected themselves in the boy's eyes and heart, and the little girl always sang again, "You will never forget that. You will never forget that." And during their whole flight, the elder tree smelled so sweetly he noticed the roses and the fresh beeches. But the elder tree smelt much stronger, for the flowers were fixed on the little girl's bosom, against which the boy often rested his head during the flight. "It is beautiful here in spring," said the little girl, and they were again in the green beechwood, where the thyme breathed forth sweet fragrance at their feet, and the pink anemones looked lovely in the green moss. "Oh, that it were always spring in the fragrant beechwood! Here it is splendid in summer," she said, and they passed by old castles of the age of chivalry. The high walls and indented battlements were reflected in the water of the ditches, on which swans were swimming and peering into the old shady avenues. The corn waved in the field like a yellow sea. Red and yellow flowers grew in the ditches, wild hops and convolvuli in full bloom in the hedges. In the evening the moon rose, large and round, and the hayricks in the meadows smelt sweetly. One can never forget it. "Here it is beautiful in autumn," said the little girl, and the atmosphere seemed twice as high and blue, while the wood shone with crimson, green, and gold. The hounds were running off. Flocks of wild fowl flew screaming over the barrows, while the bramble bushes twined round the old stones. The dark blue sea was covered with white-sailed ships, and in the barns sat old women, girls, and children picking hops into a large tub. The young ones sang songs, and the old people told fairy tales about goblins and sorcerers. It could not be more pleasant anywhere. "Here it's agreeable in winter," said the little girl, and all the trees were covered with hoar-frost, so that they looked like white coral. The snow creaked under one's feet, as if one had new boots on. One shooting star after another traversed the sky. In the room the Christmas tree was lit, and there were song and merriment. In the peasant's cottage the violin sounded, and games were played for apple quarters. Even the poorest child said, "It is beautiful in winter." And indeed it was beautiful. And the little girl showed everything to the boy, and the elder tree continued to breathe forth sweet perfume, while the red flag with the white cross was streaming in the wind. It was the flag under which the old sailor had served. The boy became a youth. He was to go out into the wide world, far away to the countries where the coffee grows. But at parting, the little girl took an elder blossom from her breast and gave it to him as a keepsake. He placed it in his prayer book, and when he opened it in distant lands, it was always at the place where the flower of remembrance was lying. And the more he looked at it, the fresher it became, so that he could almost smell the fragrance of the woods at home. He distinctly saw the little girl, with her bright blue eyes peeping out from behind the petals, and heard her whispering, "Here it is beautiful in spring, in summer, in autumn, and in winter," and hundreds of pictures passed through his mind. Thus many years rolled by. He had now become an old man, and was sitting with his old wife under an elder tree in full bloom. They held each other by the hand exactly as the great-grandfather and the great-grandmother had done outside, and, like them, they talked about bygone days and of their golden wedding. The little girl with the blue eyes and elder blossoms in her hair was sitting high up in the tree, and nodded to them, saying, "Today is the golden wedding." And then she took 2 flowers out of her wreath and kissed them. They glittered at first like silver, then like gold, and when she placed them on the heads of the old people, each flower became a golden crown. There they both sat like a king and queen under the sweet-smelling tree, which looked exactly like an elder tree, and he told his wife the story of the elder tree mother, as it had been told him when he was a little boy. They were both of opinion that the story contained many points like their own, and these similarities they liked best.
"Yes, so it is,"
said the little girl in the tree. "Some call me Little Elder Tree. Mother, others a Dryad, but my real name is Remembrance. It is I who sit in the tree which grows and grows. I can remember things and tell stories. But let's see if you have still got your flower." And the old man opened his prayer book. The elder blossom was still in it, and as fresh as if it had only just been put in. Remembrance nodded, and the two old people, with the golden crowns on their heads, sat in the glowing evening sun. They closed their eyes, and, well, now the story is ended. The little boy in bed did not know whether he had dreamt it or heard it told. The teapot stood on the table, but no elder tree was growing out of it, and the old man who had told the story was on the point of leaving the room, and he did go out. "How beautiful it was," said the little boy. "Mother, I have been to warm countries." "I believe you," said the mother. "If one takes 2 cups of hot elder tea, it is quite natural that one gets into warm countries." And she covered him up well so that he might not take cold. "You have slept soundly while I was arguing with the old man whether it was a story or a fairy tale." "And what has become of the little elder tree mother?" asked the boy. "She is in the teapot," said the mother, "and there she may remain." A little match. Cellar. It was terribly cold and nearly dark on the last evening of the old year, and the snow was falling fast. In the cold and the darkness, a poor little girl, with bare head and naked feet, roamed through the streets. It is true she had on a pair of slippers when she left home, but they were not of much use. They were very large, so large indeed that they had belonged to her mother, and the poor little creature had lost them in running across the street to avoid 2 carriages that were rolling along at a terrible rate. One of the slippers she could not find, and a boy seized upon the other and ran away with it, saying that he could use it as a cradle, when he had children of his own. So the little girl went on with her little naked feet, which were quite red and blue with the cold. In an old apron she carried a number of matches, and had a bundle of them in her hands. No one had bought anything of her the whole day, nor had anyone given her even a penny. Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along, poor little child. She looked the picture of misery. The snowflakes fell on her long, fair hair, which hung in curls on her shoulders, but she regarded them not. Lights were shining from every window, and there was a savoury smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she remembered that. In a corner between 2 houses, one of which projected beyond the other, she sank down and huddled herself together. She had drawn her little feet under her, but she could not keep off the cold, and she dared not go home, for she had sold no matches, and could not take home even a penny of money. Her father would certainly beat her. Besides, it was almost as cold at home as here, for they had only the roof to cover them, through which the wind howled, although the largest holes had been stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost frozen with the cold. Ah, perhaps a burning match might be some good, if she could draw it from the bundle and strike it against the wall, just to warm her fingers. She drew one out. Scratch! How it sputtered as it burnt! It gave a warm, bright light, like a little candle, as she held her hand over it. It was really a wonderful light. It seemed to the little girl that she was sitting by a large iron stove, with polished brass feet and a brass ornament. How the fire burned, and seemed so beautifully warm that the child stretched out her feet as if to warm them, when, lo! The flame of the match went out. The stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the half-burnt match in her hand. She rubbed another match on the wall. It burst into a flame, and where its light fell upon the wall, it became as transparent as a veil, and she could see into the room. The table was covered with a snowy white tablecloth, on which stood a splendid dinner service and a steaming roast goose, stuffed with apples and dried plums. And what was still more wonderful, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled across the floor with a knife and fork in its breast to the little girl. Then the match went out, and there remained nothing but the thick, damp, cold wall before her. She lighted another match, and then she found herself sitting under a beautiful Christmas tree. It was larger and more beautifully decorated than the one which she had seen through the glass door at the rich merchant's. Thousands of tapers were burning upon the green branches, and coloured pictures, like those she had seen in the show windows, looked down upon it all. The little one stretched out her hand towards them, and the match went out. The Christmas lights rose higher and higher, till they looked to her like the stars in the sky. Then she saw a star fall, leaving behind it a bright streak of fire. "Someone is dying," thought the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only one who had ever loved her, and who was now dead, had told her that when a star falls, a soul was going up to God. She again rubbed a match on the wall, and the light shone round her. In the brightness stood her old grandmother, clear and shining, yet mild and loving in her appearance. "Grandmother," cried the little one, "oh, take me with you." "I know you will go away when the match burns out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the roast goose, and the large, glorious Christmas tree." And she made haste to light the whole bundle of matches, for she wished to keep her grandmother there. And the matches glowed with a light that was brighter than the noonday, and her grandmother had never appeared so large or so beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and they both flew upwards in brightness and joy, far above the earth, where there was neither cold, nor hunger, nor pain, for they were with God. In the dawn of morning there lay the poor little one, with pale cheeks and smiling mouth, leaning against the wall. She had been frozen to death on the last evening of the year, and the New Year's sun rose and shone upon a little corpse. The child still sat, in the stiffness of death, holding the matches in her hand, one bundle of which was burnt. "She tried to warm herself," said some. No one imagined what beautiful things she had seen, nor into what glory she had entered with her grandmother on New Year's Day. The little mermaid, far out in the ocean, where the water is as blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, it is very, very deep, so deep indeed that no cable could fathom it. Many church steeples, piled one upon another, would not reach from the ground beneath to the surface of the water above. There dwell the Sea King and his subjects. We must not imagine that there is nothing at the bottom of the sea but bare yellow sand. No, indeed. The most singular flowers and plants grow there, the leaves and stems of which are so pliant that the slightest agitation of the water causes them to stir as if they had life. Fishes, both large and small, glide between the branches, as birds fly among the trees here upon land. In the deepest spot of all stands the castle of the Sea King. Its walls are built of coral, and the long, Gothic windows are of the clearest amber. The roof is formed of shells that open and close as the water flows over them. Their appearance is very beautiful, for in each lies a glittering pearl, which would be fit for the diadem of a queen. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, and his aged mother kept house for him. She was a very wise woman, and exceedingly proud of her high birth. On that account she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others, also of high rank, were only allowed to wear 6. She was, however, deserving of very great praise, especially for her care of the little sea princesses, her granddaughters. They were 6 beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. But, like all the others, she had no feet, and her body ended in a fish's tail. All day long they played in the great halls of the castle, or among the living flowers that grew out of the walls. The large amber windows were open, and the fish swam in, just as the swallows fly into our houses when we open the windows, excepting that the fishes swam up to the princesses, ate out of their hands, and allowed themselves to be stroked. Outside the castle there was a beautiful garden, in which grew bright red and dark blue flowers, and blossoms like flames of fire. The fruit glittered like gold, and the leaves and stems waved to and fro continually. The earth itself was the finest sand, but blue as the flame of burning sulphur. Over everything lay a peculiar blue radiance, as if it were surrounded by the air from above, through which the blue sky shone, instead of the dark depths of the sea. In calm weather the sun could be seen looking like a purple flower, with the light streaming from the calyx. Each of the young princesses had a little plot of ground in the garden, where she might dig and plant as she pleased. One arranged her flower bed into the form of a whale. Another thought it better to make hers like the figure of a little mermaid, but that of the youngest was round like the sun, and contained flowers as red as his rays at sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful, and while her sisters would be delighted with the wonderful things which they obtained from the wrecks of vessels, she cared for nothing but her pretty red flowers, like the sun, excepting a beautiful marble statue. It was the representation of a handsome boy carved out of pure white stone, which had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a wreck. She planted by the statue a rose-coloured weeping willow. It grew splendidly, and very soon hung its fresh branches over the statue, almost down to the blue sands. The shadow had a violet tint, and waved to and fro like the branches. It seemed as if the crown of the tree and the root were at play, and trying to kiss each other. Nothing gave her so much pleasure as to hear about the world above the sea. She made her old grandmother tell her all she knew of the ships and of the towns, the people and the animals. To her it seemed most wonderful and beautiful to hear that the flowers of the land should have fragrance, and not those below the sea, that the trees of the forest should be green, and that the fishes among the trees could sing so sweetly that it was quite a pleasure to hear them. Her grandmother called the little birds fishes, or she would not have understood her, for she had never seen birds. "When you have reached your 15th year," said the grandmother, "you will have permission to rise up out of the sea, to sit on the rocks in the moonlight while the great ships are sailing by, and then you will see both forests and towns." In the following year, one of the sisters would be 15, but as each was a year younger than the other, the youngest would have to wait 5 years before her turn came to rise up from the bottom of the ocean and see the earth as we do. However, each promised to tell the others what she saw on her first visit, and what she thought the most beautiful, for their grandmother could not tell them enough. There were so many things on which they wanted information. None of them longed so much for her turn to come as the youngest, she who had the longest time to wait, and who was so quiet and thoughtful. Many nights she stood by the open window, looking up through the dark blue water, and watching the fish as they splashed about with their fins and tails. She could see the moon and stars shining faintly, but through the water they looked larger than they do to our eyes. When something like a black cloud passed between her and them, she knew that it was either a whale swimming over her head, or a ship full of human beings who never imagined that a pretty little mermaid was standing beneath them, holding out her white hands towards the keel of their ship. As soon as the eldest was 15, she was allowed to rise to the surface of the ocean. When she came back, she had hundreds of things to talk about, but the most beautiful, she said, was to lie in the moonlight, on a sandbank, in the quiet sea, near the coast, and to gaze on a large town nearby where the lights were twinkling like hundreds of stars, to listen to the sounds of the music, the noise of carriages, and the voices of human beings, and then to hear the merry bells peal out from the church steeples, and because she could not go near to all those wonderful things, she longed for them more than ever. Oh, did not the youngest sister listen eagerly to all these descriptions? And afterwards, when she stood at the open window looking up through the dark blue water, she thought of the great city, with all its bustle and noise, and even fancied she could hear the sound of the church bells down in the depths of the sea. In another year, the second sister received permission to rise to the surface of the water and to swim about where she pleased. She rose just as the sun was setting, and this, she said, was the most beautiful sight of all. The whole sky looked like gold, while violet and rose-coloured clouds, which she could not describe, floated over her, and, still more rapidly than the clouds, flew a large flock of wild swans towards the setting sun, looking like a long white veil across the sea. She also swam towards the sun, but it sunk into the waves, and the rosy tints faded from the clouds and from the sea. The third sister's turn followed. She was the boldest of them all, and she swam up a broad river that emptied itself into the sea. On the banks she saw green hills covered with beautiful vines. Palaces and castles peeped out from amid the proud trees of the forest. She heard the birds singing, and the rays of the sun were so powerful that she was obliged often to dive down under the water to cool her burning face. In a narrow creek she found a whole troop of little human children, quite naked and sporting about in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they fled in a great fright. And then a little black animal came to the water. It was a dog, but she did not know that, for she had never before seen one. This animal barked at her so terribly that she became frightened and rushed back to the open sea. But she said she should never forget the beautiful forest, the green hills, and the pretty little children who could swim in the water, although they had not fishes' tails. The fourth sister was more timid. She remained in the midst of the sea, but she said it was quite as beautiful there as nearer the land. She could see for so many miles around her, and the sky above looked like a bell of glass. She had seen the ships, but at such a great distance that they looked like seagulls. The dolphins sported in the waves, and the great whales spouted water from their nostrils till it seemed as if 100 fountains were playing in every direction. The fifth sister's birthday occurred in the winter, so when her turn came, she saw what the others had not seen the first time they went up. The sea looked quite green, and large icebergs were floating about, each like a pearl, she said, but larger and loftier than the churches built by men. They were of the most singular shapes, and glittered like diamonds. She had seated herself upon one of the largest, and let the wind play with her long hair, and she remarked that all the ships sailed by rapidly, and steered as far away as they could from the iceberg, as if they were afraid of it. Towards evening, as the sun went down, dark clouds covered the sky. The thunder rolled and the lightning flashed, and the red light glowed on the icebergs as they rocked and tossed on the heaving sea. On all the ships the sails were reefed with fear and trembling, while she sat calmly on the floating iceberg, watching the blue lightning as it darted its forked flashes into the sea. When first the sisters had permission to rise to the surface, they were each delighted with the new and beautiful sights they saw. But now, as grown-up girls, they could go when they pleased, and they had become indifferent about it. They wished themselves back again in the water, and after a month had passed they said it was much more beautiful down below and pleasanter to be at home. Yet often, in the evening hours, the 5 sisters would twine their arms round each other and rise to the surface in a row. They had more beautiful voices than any human being could have, and before the approach of a storm, and when they expected a ship would be lost, they swam before the vessel and sang sweetly of the delights to be found in the depths of the sea, and begging the sailors not to fear if they sank to the bottom. But the sailors could not understand the song. They took it for the howling of the storm, and these things were never to be beautiful for them, for if the ship sank, the men were drowned, and their dead bodies alone reached the palace of the Sea King. When the sisters rose, arm in arm, through the water in this way, their youngest sister would stand quite alone, looking after them, ready to cry, only that the mermaids have no tears, and therefore they suffer more. "Oh, were I but 15 years old," said she, "I know that I shall love the world up there and all the people who live in it." At last she reached her 15th year. "Well now, you are grown up," said the old dowager, her grandmother, "so you must let me adorn you like your other sisters." And she placed a wreath of white lilies in her hair, and every flower leaf was half a pearl. Then the old lady ordered 8 great oysters to attach themselves to the tail of the princess to show her high rank.
"But they hurt me so,"
said the little mermaid.
"Pride must suffer pain,"
replied the old lady. Oh, how gladly she would have shaken off all this grandeur and laid aside the heavy wreath. The red flowers in her own garden would have suited her much better, but she could not help herself, so she said, "Farewell," and rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the water. The sun had just set as she raised her head above the waves, but the clouds were tinted with crimson and gold, and through the glimmering twilight beamed the evening star in all its beauty. The sea was calm, and the air mild and fresh. A large ship with 3 masts lay becalmed on the water, with only 1 sail set, for not a breeze stiffed, and the sailors sat idle on deck or amongst the rigging. There was music and song on board, and, as darkness came on, 100-coloured lanterns were lighted, as if the flags of all nations waved in the air. The little mermaid swam close to the cabin windows, and now and then, as the waves lifted her up, she could look in through clear glass window panes, and see a number of well-dressed people within. Among them was a young prince, the most beautiful of all. With large black eyes, he was 16 years of age, and his birthday was being kept with much rejoicing. The sailors were dancing on deck, but when the prince came out of the cabin, more than 100 rockets rose in the air, making it as bright as day. The little mermaid was so startled that she dived under water, and when she again stretched out her head, it appeared as if all the stars of heaven were falling around her. She had never seen such fireworks before. Great suns spurted fire about, splendid fireflies flew into the blue air, and everything was reflected in the clear, calm sea beneath. The ship itself was so brightly illuminated that all the people, and even the smallest rope, could be distinctly and plainly seen. And how handsome the young prince looked, as he pressed the hands of all present and smiled at them, while the music resounded through the clear night air. It was very late, yet the little mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship or from the beautiful prince. The coloured lanterns had been extinguished, no more rockets rose in the air, and the cannon had ceased firing, but the sea became restless, and a moaning, grumbling sound could be heard beneath the waves. Still the little mermaid remained by the cabin window, rocking up and down on the water, which enabled her to look in. After a while the sails were quickly unfurled, and the noble ship continued her passage, but soon the waves rose higher, Heavy clouds darkened the sky, and lightning appeared in the distance. A dreadful storm was approaching. Once more the sails were reefed, and the great ship pursued her flying course over the raging sea. The waves rose mountains high, as if they would have overtopped the mast, but the ship dived like a swan between them, and then rose again on their lofty, foaming crests. To the little mermaid this appeared pleasant sport, not so to the sailors. At length the ship groaned and creaked. The thick planks gave way under the lashing of the sea as it broke over the deck. The mainmast snapped asunder like a reed. The ship lay over on her side, and the water rushed in. The little mermaid now perceived that the crew were in danger. Even she herself was obliged to be careful to avoid the beams and planks of the wreck which lay scattered on the water. At one moment it was so pitch dark that she could not see a single object, but a flash of lightning revealed the whole scene. She could see everyone who had been on board, excepting the prince when the ship parted. She had seen him sink into the deep waves, and she was glad, for she thought he would now be with her. And then she remembered that human beings could not live in the water, so that when he got down to her father's palace he would be quite dead. But he must not die, so she swam about among the beams and planks which strewed the surface of the sea, forgetting that they could crush her to pieces. Then she dived deeply under the dark waters, rising and falling with the waves, till at length she managed to reach the young prince, who was fast losing the power of swimming in that stormy sea. His limbs were failing him, his beautiful eyes were closed, and he would have died had not the little mermaid come to his assistance. She held his head above the water, and let the waves drift them where they would. In the morning the storm had ceased, but of the ship not a single fragment could be seen. The sun rose up red and glowing from the water, and its beams brought back the hue of health to the prince's cheeks. But his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, smooth forehead and stroked back his wet hair. He seemed to her like the marble statue in her little garden, and she kissed him again, and wished that he might live. Presently they came in sight of land. She saw lofty blue mountains, on which the white snow rested, as if a flock of swans were lying upon them. Near the coast were beautiful green forests, and close by stood a large building, whether a church or a convent she could not tell. Orange and citron trees grew in the garden, and before the door stood lofty palms. The sea here formed a little bay, in which the water was quite still but very deep, so she swam with the handsome prince to the beach, which was covered with fine white sand, and there she laid him in the warm sunshine, taking care to raise his head higher than his body. Then bells sounded in the large white building, and a number of young girls came into the garden. The little mermaid swam out farther from the shore and placed herself between some high rocks that rose out of the water. Then she covered her head and neck with the foam of the sea, so that her little face might not be seen, and watched to see what would become of the poor prince. She did not wait long before she saw a young girl approach the spot where he lay. She seemed frightened at first, but only for a moment. Then she fetched a number of people, and the mermaid saw that the prince came to life again, and smiled upon those who stood round him. But to her he sent no smile. He knew not that she had saved him. This made her very unhappy, and when he was led away into the great building, she dived down sorrowfully into the water, and returned to her father's castle. She had always been silent and thoughtful, and now she was more so than ever. Her sisters asked her what she had seen during her first visit to the surface of the water, but she would tell them nothing. Many an evening and morning did she rise to the place where she had left the prince. She saw the fruits in the garden ripen till they were gathered. The snow on the tops of the mountains melt away, but she never saw the prince, and therefore she returned home, always more sorrowful than before. It was her only comfort to sit in her own little garden and fling her arm round the beautiful marble statue which was like the prince. But she gave up tending her flowers, and they grew in wild confusion over the paths, twining their long leaves and stems round the branches of the trees, so that the whole place became dark and gloomy. At length she could bear it no longer, and told one of her sisters all about it. Then the others heard the secret, and very soon it became known to two mermaids whose intimate friend happened to know who the prince was. She had also seen the festival on board ship, and she told them where the prince came from, and where his palace stood. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses. Then they entwined their arms and rose up in a long row to the surface of the water, close by the spot where they knew the prince's palace stood. It was built of bright yellow, shining stone, with long flights of marble steps, one of which reached quite down to the sea. Splendid gilded cupolas rose over the roof, and between the pillars that surrounded the whole building stood lifelike statues of marble. Through the clear crystal of the lofty windows could be seen noble rooms, with costly silk curtains and hangings of tapestry, while the walls were covered with beautiful paintings, which were a pleasure to look at. In the centre of the largest saloon, a fountain threw its sparkling jets high up into the glass cupola of the ceiling, through which the sun shone down upon the water and upon the beautiful plants growing round the basin of the fountain. Now that she knew where he lived, she spent many an evening and many a night on the water near the palace. She would swim much nearer the shore than any of the others ventured to do. Indeed, once she went quite up the narrow channel under the marble balcony, which threw a broad shadow on the water. Here she would sit and watch the young prince, who thought himself quite alone in the bright moonlight. She saw him many times of an evening sailing in a pleasant boat, with music playing and flags waving. She peeped out from among the green rushes, and if the wind caught her long silvery white veil, those who saw it believed it to be a swan spreading out its wings. On many a night, too, when the fishermen with their torches were out at sea, she heard them relate so many good things about the doings of the young prince that she was glad she had saved his life when he had been tossed about half dead on the waves, and she remembered that his head had rested on her bosom, and how heartily she had kissed him. But he knew nothing of all this, and could not even dream of her. She grew more and more fond of human beings, and wished more and more to be able to wander about with those whose world seemed to be so much larger than her own. They could fly over the sea in ships, and mount the high hills which were far above the clouds, and the lands they possessed, their woods and their fields, stretched far away beyond the reach of her sight. There was so much that she wished to know, and her sisters were unable to answer all her questions. Then she applied to her old grandmother, who knew all about the upper world, which she very rightly called the lands above the sea. "If human beings are not drowned," asked the little mermaid, "can they live forever? Do they never die, as we do here in the sea?" "Yes," replied the old lady, "they must also die, and their term of life is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live to 300 years, but when we cease to exist here, we only become the foam on the surface of the water, and we have not even a grave down here of those we love. We have not immortal souls, we shall never live again. But, like the green sea weed, when once it has been cut off, we can never flourish more. Human beings, on the contrary, have a soul which lives forever, lives after the body has been turned to dust. It rises up through the clear, pure air beyond the glittering stars. As we rise out of the water and behold all the land of the earth, so do they rise to unknown and glorious regions which we shall never see." "Why have not we an immortal soul?" asked the little mermaid mournfully. "I would give gladly all the hundreds of years that I have to live, to be a human being only for one day. and to have the hope of knowing the happiness of that glorious world above the stars. "You must not think of that," said the old woman. "We feel ourselves to be much happier and much better off than human beings."
"So I shall die,"
said the little mermaid, "and as the foam of the sea, I shall be driven about never again to hear the music of the waves, or to see the pretty flowers, nor the red sun. Is there anything I can do to win an immortal soul?" "No," said the old woman, "unless a man were to love you so much that you were more to him than his father or mother, and if all his thoughts and all his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to you here and hereafter, then his soul would glide into your body, and you would obtain a share in the future happiness of mankind. He would give a soul to you, and retain his own as well. But this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which amongst us is considered so beautiful, is thought on earth to be quite ugly. They do not know any better, and they think it necessary to have 2 stout props, which they call legs, in order to be handsome." Then the little mermaid sighed, and looked sorrowfully at her fish's tail.
"Let us be happy,"
said the old lady, "and dart and spring about during the 300 years that we have to live, which is really quite long enough. After that we can rest ourselves all the better. This evening we are going to have a court ball. It is one of those splendid sights which we can never see on earth. The walls and the ceiling of the large ballroom were of thick but transparent crystal. May hundreds of colossal shells, some of a deep red, others of a grass green, stood on each side in rows, with blue fire in them, which lighted up the whole saloon and shone through the walls, so that the sea was also illuminated. Innumerable fishes, great and small, swam past the crystal walls. On some of them the scales glowed with a purple brilliancy, and on others they shone like silver and gold. Through the halls flowed a broad stream, and in it danced the mermen and the mermaids to the music of their own sweet singing. No one on earth has such a lovely voice as theirs. The little mermaid sang more sweetly than them all. The whole court applauded her with hands and tails, and for a moment her heart felt quite gay, for she knew she had the loveliest voice of any on earth or in the sea. But she soon thought again of the world above her, for she could not forget the charming prince, nor her sorrow that she had not an immortal soul like his. Therefore she crept away silently out of her father's palace, and while everything within was gladness and song, she sat in her own little garden, sorrowful and alone. Then she heard the bugle sounding through the water, and thought, "He is certainly sailing above, he on whom my wishes depend, and in whose hands I should like to place the happiness of my life. I will venture all for him, and to win an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing in my father's palace, I will go to the sea witch, of whom I have always been so much afraid. But she can give me counsel and help." And then the little mermaid went out from her garden and took the road to the foaming whirlpools, behind which the sorceress lived. She had never been that way before. Neither flowers nor grass grew there. Nothing but bare, grey, sandy ground stretched out to the whirlpool, where the water, like foaming mill-wheels, whirled round everything that it seized and cast it into the fathomless deep. Through the midst of these crushing whirlpools the little mermaid was obliged to pass, to reach the dominions of the sea witch, and also for a long distance the only road lay right across a quantity of warm, bubbling mire, called by the witch her turf moor. Beyond this stood her house, in the centre of a strange forest, in which all the trees and flowers were polypi, half animals and half plants. They looked like serpents, with 100 heads growing out of the ground. The branches were long, slimy arms, with fingers like flexible worms. moving limb after limb from the root to the top. All that could be reached in the sea they seized upon and held fast, so that it never escaped from their clutches. The little mermaid was so alarmed at what she saw that she stood still, and her heart beat with fear, and she was very nearly turning back. But she thought of the prince and of the human soul for which she longed, and her courage returned. She fastened her long flowing hair round her head, so that the polypi might not seize hold of it. She laid her hands together across her bosom, and then she darted forward as a fish shoots through the water. Between the supple arms and fingers of the ugly polypi, which were stretched out on each side of her, she saw that each held in its grasp something it had seized with its numerous little arms, as if they were iron bands. The white skeletons of human beings who had perished at sea and had sunk down into the deep waters, skeletons of land animals, oars, rudders, and chests of ships were lying tightly grasped by their clinging arms, even a little mermaid whom they had caught and strangled. And this seemed the most shocking of all to the little princess. She now came to a space of marshy ground in the wood, where large, fat water snakes were rolling in the mire and showing their ugly, drab-coloured bodies. In the midst of this spot stood a house, built with the bones of shipwrecked human beings. There sat the sea witch, allowing a toad to eat from her mouth, just as people sometimes feed a canary with a piece of sugar. She called the ugly water snakes her little chickens, and allowed them to crawl all over her bosom. "I know what you want," said the sea witch. "It is very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, and it will bring you to sorrow, my pretty princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail, and to have two supports instead of it, like human beings on earth, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, and that you may have an immortal soul." And then the witch laughed so loud and disgustingly that the toad and the snakes fell to the ground and lay there wriggling about. "You are but just in time," said the witch, "for after sunrise tomorrow I should not be able to help you till the end of another year. I will prepare a draught for you, with which you must swim to land tomorrow before sunrise and sit down on the shore and drink it. Your tail will then disappear and shrink up into what mankind calls legs, and you will feel great pain, as if a sword were passing through you. But all who see you will say that you are the prettiest little human being they ever saw. You will still have the same floating gracefulness of movement, and no dancer will ever tread so lightly. But at every step you take it will feel as if you were treading upon sharp knives, and that the blood must flow. If you will bear all this—" "I will help you." "Yes, I will," said the little princess in a trembling voice, as she thought of the prince and the immortal soul. "But think again," said the witch, "for when once your shape has become like a human being, you can no more be a mermaid. You will never return through the water to your sisters or to your father's palace again. And if you do not win the love of the prince, so that he is willing to forget his father and mother for your sake, and to love you with his whole soul, and allow the priest to join your hands, that you may be man and wife, then you will never have an immortal soul. The first morning after he marries another, your heart will break, and you will become foam on the crest of the waves." "I will do it," said the little mermaid, and she became pale as death. "But I must be paid also," said the witch, "and it is not a trifle that I ask. You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell here in the depths of the sea, and you believe that you will be able to charm the prince with it also. But this voice you must give to me. The best thing you possess will I have for the price of my draught. My own blood must be mixed with it, that it may be as sharp as a two-edged sword." "But if you take away my voice," said the little mermaid, "what is left for me?" Your beautiful form, your graceful walk, and your expressive eyes. Surely with these you can enchain a man's heart. Well, have you lost your courage? Put out your little tongue, that I may cut it off as my payment, then you shall have the powerful draught." "It shall be," said the little mermaid. Then the witch placed her cauldron on the fire to prepare the magic draught. "Cleanliness is a good thing," said she, scouring the vessel with snakes, which she had tied together in a large knot. Then she pricked herself in the breast and let the black blood drop into it. The steam that rose formed itself into such horrible shapes that no one could look at them without fear. Every moment the witch threw something else into the vessel, and when it began to boil, the sound was like the weeping of a crocodile. When at last the magic draught was ready, it looked like the clearest water. "There it is for you," said the witch. Then she cut off the mermaid's tongue so that she became dumb and would never again speak or sing. "If the polypi should seize hold of you as you return through the wood," said the witch, "throw over them a few drops of the potion, and their fingers will be torn into 1,000 pieces." But the little mermaid had no occasion to do this, for the polypi sprang back in terror when they caught sight of the glittering draught which shone in her hand like a twinkling star. So she passed quickly through the wood and the marsh and between the rushing whirlpools. She saw that in her father's palace the torches in the ballroom were extinguished, and all within asleep. But she did not venture to go into them, for now she was dumb and going to leave them forever. She felt as if her heart would break. She stole into the garden, took a flower from the flower beds of each of her sisters, kissed her hand 1,000 times towards the palace, and then rose up through the dark blue waters. The sun had not risen when she came in sight of the prince's palace, and approached the beautiful marble steps, but the moon shone clear and bright. Then the little mermaid drank the magic draught, and it seemed as if a two-edged sword went through her delicate body. She fell into a swoon and lay like one dead. When the sun arose and shone over the sea, she recovered and felt a sharp pain, but just before her stood the handsome young prince. He fixed his coal-black eyes upon her so earnestly that she cast down her own, and then became aware that her fish's tail was gone, and that she had as pretty a pair of white legs and tiny feet as any little maiden could have. But she had no clothes, so she wrapped herself in her long, thick hair. The prince asked her who she was, and where she came from, and she looked at him mildly and sorrowfully with her deep blue eyes, but she could not speak. Every step she took was as the witch had said it would be. She felt as if treading upon the points of needles or sharp knives. But she bore it willingly, and stepped as lightly by the prince's side as a soap bubble, so that he and all who saw her wondered at her graceful, swaying movements. She was very soon arrayed in costly robes of silk and muslin, and was the most beautiful creature in the palace. But she was dumb, and could neither speak nor sing. Beautiful female slaves, dressed in silk and gold, stepped forward and sang before the prince and his royal parents. One sang better than all the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her. This was great sorrow to the little mermaid. She knew how much more sweetly she herself could sing once, and she thought, "Oh, if he could only know that! I have given away my voice forever, to be with him." The slaves next performed some pretty fairy-like dances to the sound of beautiful music. Then the little mermaid raised her lovely white arms, stood on the tips of her toes, and glided over the floor and danced as no one yet had been able to dance. At each moment her beauty became more revealed, and her expressive eyes appealed more directly to the heart than the songs of the slaves. Everyone was enchanted, especially the prince, who called her his little foundling, and she danced again quite readily to please him. though each time her foot touched the floor, it seemed as if she trod on sharp knives. The prince said she should remain with him always, and she received permission to sleep at his door on a velvet cushion. He had a page's dress made for her, that she might accompany him on horseback. They rode together through the sweet-scented woods, where the green boughs touched their shoulders, and the little birds sang among the fresh leaves. She climbed with the prince to the tops of high mountains, and although her tender feet bled so that even her steps were marked, she only laughed, and followed him till they could see the clouds beneath them looking like a flock of birds travelling to distant lands. While at the prince's palace, and when all the household were asleep, she would go and sit on the broad marble steps, for it eased her burning feet to bathe them in the cold sea-water. And then she thought of all those below in the deep. Once during the night her sisters came up arm in arm, singing sorrowfully as they floated on the water. She beckoned to them, and then they recognized her and told her how she had grieved them. After that, they came to the same place every night, and once she saw in the distance her old grandmother, who had not been to the surface of the sea for many years, and the old Sea King, her father, with his crown on his head. They stretched out their hands towards her, but they did not venture so near the land as her sisters did. As the days passed, she loved the prince more fondly, and he loved her as he would love a little child. But it never came into his head to make her his wife. Yet, unless he married her, she could not receive an immortal soul, and on the morning after his marriage with another, she would dissolve into the foam of the sea. "Do you not love me the best of them all?" the eyes of the little mermaid seemed to say when he took her in his arms and kissed her fair forehead. "Yes." "You are dear to me," said the prince, "for you have the best heart, and you are the most devoted to me. You are like a young maiden whom I once saw, but whom I shall never meet again. I was in a ship that was wrecked, and the waves cast me ashore near a holy temple, where several young maidens performed the service. The youngest of them found me on the shore, and saved my life. I saw her but twice, and she is the only one in the world whom I could love. But you are like her, and you have almost driven her image out of my mind. She belongs to the holy temple, and my good fortune has sent you to me instead of her, and we will never part." "Ah, he knows not that it was I who saved his life," thought the little mermaid. "I carried him over the sea to the wood where the temple stands. I sat beneath the foam and watched till the human beings came to help him. I saw the pretty maiden that he loves better than he loves me." And the mermaid sighed deeply, but she could not shed tears. "He says the maiden belongs to the holy temple. Therefore she will never return to the world. They will meet no more, while I am by his side, and see him every day. I will take care of him and love him, and give up my life for his sake." Very soon it was said that the prince must marry, and that the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king would be his wife, for a fine ship was being fitted out. Although the prince gave out that he merely intended to pay a visit to the king, it was generally supposed that he really went to see his daughter. A great company were to go with him. The little mermaid smiled and shook her head. She knew the prince's thoughts better than any of the others. "I must travel," he had said to her. "I must see this beautiful princess. My parents desire it, but they will not oblige me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her. She is not like the beautiful maiden in the temple, whom you resemble. If I were forced to choose a bride, I would rather choose you, my dumb foundling, with those expressive eyes." And then he kissed her rosy mouth, played with her long waving hair, and laid his head on her heart, while she dreamed of human happiness and an immortal soul. "You are not afraid of the sea, my dumb child," said he, as they stood on the deck of the noble ship which was to carry them to the country of the neighbouring king. And then he told her of storm and of calm, of strange fishes in the deep beneath them, and of what the divers had seen there. And she smiled at his descriptions, for she knew better than anyone what wonders were at the bottom of the sea. In the moonlight, when all on board were asleep, excepting the man at the helm, who was steering, she sat on the deck, gazing down through the clear water. She thought she could distinguish her father's castle, and upon it her aged grandmother, with the silver crown on her head, looking through the rushing tide at the keel of the vessel. Then her sisters came up on the waves and gazed at her mournfully, wringing their white hands. She beckoned to them and smiled and wanted to tell them how happy and well off she was, but the cabin boy approached. And when her sisters dived down, he thought it was only the foam of the sea which he saw. The next morning, the ship sailed into the harbour of a beautiful town belonging to the king whom the prince was going to visit. The church bells were ringing, and from the high towers sounded a flourish of trumpets, and soldiers with flying colours and glittering bayonets lined the rocks through which they passed. Every day was a festival. Balls and entertainments followed one another. But the princess had not yet appeared. People said that she was being brought up and educated in a religious house, where she was learning every royal virtue. At last she came. Then the little mermaid, who was very anxious to see whether she was really beautiful, was obliged to acknowledge that she had never seen a more perfect vision of beauty. Her skin was delicately fair, and beneath her long dark eyelashes her laughing blue eyes shone with truth and purity. "It was you," said the prince, "who saved my life when I lay dead on the beach." And he folded his blushing bride in his arms. "Oh, I am too happy," said he to the little mermaid. "My fondest hopes are all fulfilled. You will rejoice at my happiness, for your devotion to me is great and sincere." The little mermaid kissed his hand and felt as if her heart were already broken. His wedding morning would bring death to her, and she would change into the foam of the sea. All the church bells rung, and the heralds rode about the town proclaiming the betrothal. Perfumed oil was burning in costly silver lamps on every altar. The priests waved the censers, while the bride and bridegroom joined their hands and received the blessing of the bishop. The little mermaid, dressed in silk and gold, held up the bride's train, but her ears heard nothing of the festive music, and her eyes saw not the holy ceremony. She thought of the night of death which was coming to her, and of all she had lost in the world. On the same evening, the bride and bridegroom went on board ship. Cannons were roaring, flags waving, and in the centre of the ship, a costly tent of purple and gold had been erected. It contained elegant couches for the reception of the bridal pair during the night. The ship, with swelling sails and a favourable wind, glided away smoothly and lightly over the calm sea. When it grew dark, a number of coloured lamps were lit, and the sailors danced merrily on the deck. The little mermaid could not help thinking of her first rising out of the sea, when she had seen similar festivities and joys, and she joined in the dance, poised herself in the air as a swallow when he pursues his prey, and all present cheered her with wonder. She had never danced so elegantly before. Her tender feet felt as if cut with sharp knives, but she cared not for it. A sharper pang had pierced through her heart. She knew this was the last evening she should ever see the prince, for whom she had forsaken her kindred and her home. She had given up her beautiful voice, and suffered unheard of pain daily for him, while he knew nothing of it. This was the last evening that she would breathe the same air with him, or gaze on the starry sky and the deep sea. An eternal night without a thought or a dream awaited her. She had no soul, and now she could never win one. All was joy and gaiety on board ship, till long after midnight she laughed and danced with the rest, while the thoughts of death were in her heart. The prince kissed his beautiful bride, while she played with his raven hair, till they went arm in arm to rest in the splendid tent. Then all became still on board the ship. The helmsman, alone awake, stood at the helm. The little mermaid leaned her white arms on the edge of the vessel and looked towards the east for the first blush of morning, for that first ray of dawn that would bring her death. She saw her sisters rising out of the flood. They were as pale as herself, but their long, beautiful hair waved no more in the wind and had been cut off. "We have given our hair to the witch," said they, "to obtain help for you, that you may not die tonight. She has given us a knife. Here it is. See, it is very sharp. Before the sun rises, you must plunge it into the heart of the prince. When the warm blood falls upon your feet, they will grow together again and form into a fish's tail, and you will be once more a mermaid, and return to us to live out your 300 years before you die and change into the salt sea foam. Haste, then. He or you must die before sunrise. Our old grandmother moans so for you that her white hair is falling off from sorrow as ours fell under the witch's scissors. Kill the prince and come back. Hasten. Do you not see the first red streaks in the sky? In a few minutes the sun will rise, and you must die." And then they sighed deeply and mournfully, and sank down beneath the waves. The little mermaid drew back the crimson curtain of the tent and beheld the fair bride with her head resting on the prince's breast. She bent down and kissed his fair brow, then looked at the sky on which the rosy dawn grew brighter and brighter. Then she glanced at the sharp knife, and again fixed her eyes on the prince, who whispered the name of his bride in his dreams. She was in his thoughts, and the knife trembled in the hand of the little mermaid. Then she flung it far away from her into the waves. The water turned red where it fell, and the drops that spurted up looked like blood. She cast one more lingering, half-fainting glance at the prince, and then threw herself from the ship into the sea, and thought her body was dissolving into foam. The sun rose above the waves, and his warm rays fell on the cold foam of the little mermaid, who did not feel as if she were dying. She saw the bright sun, and all around her floated hundreds of transparent, beautiful beings. She could see through them the white sails of the ship and the red clouds in the sky. Their speech was melodious, but too ethereal to be heard by mortal ears, as they were also unseen by mortal eyes. The little mermaid perceived that she had a body like theirs, and that she continued to rise higher and higher out of the foam. "Where am I?" asked she, and her voice sounded ethereal as the voice of those who were with her. No earthly music could imitate it. "Among the daughters of the air," answered one of them. "A mermaid has not an immortal soul, nor can she obtain one unless she wins the love of a human being. On the power of another hangs her eternal destiny. But the daughters of the air, although they do not possess an immortal soul, can, by their good deeds, procure one for themselves. We fly to warm countries and cool the sultry air that destroys mankind with the pestilence. We carry the perfume of the flowers to spread health and restoration. After we have striven for 300 years to all the good in our power, we receive an immortal soul and take part in the happiness of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have tried with your whole heart to do as we are doing. You have suffered and endured and raised yourself to the spirit world by your good deeds, and now, by striving for 300 years in the same way, you may obtain an immortal soul." The little mermaid lifted her glorified eyes towards the sun and felt them, for the first time, filling with tears. On the ship in which she had left the prince there were life and noise. She saw him and his beautiful bride searching for her. Sorrowfully they gazed at the pearly foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the forehead of her bride and fanned the prince, and then mounted with the other children of the air to a rosy cloud that floated through the ether. "After 300 years, thus shall we float into the kingdom of heaven," said she. "And we may even get there sooner," whispered one of her companions, "unseen. We can enter the houses of men where there are children, and for every day on which we find a good child, who is the joy of his parents and deserves their love, our time of probation is shortened. The child does not know, when we fly through the room, that we smile with joy at his good conduct, for we can count 1 year less of our 300 years. But when we see a naughty or a wicked child, we shed tears of sorrow, and for every tear a day is added to our time of trial. The loveliest rose in the world. There lived once a great queen, in whose garden were found at all seasons the most splendid flowers, and from every land in the world. She specially loved roses, and therefore she possessed the most beautiful varieties of this flower, from the wild hedge-rose with its apple-scented leaves to the splendid Provence rose. They grew near the shelter of the walls, wound themselves round columns and window frames, crept along passages and over the ceilings of the halls. They were of every fragrance and colour. But care and sorrow dwelt within these halls. The queen lay upon a sick bed, and the doctors declared that she must die. "There is still one thing that could save her," said one of the wisest among them. "Bring her the loveliest rose in the world, one which exhibits the purest and brightest love, and if it is brought to her before her eyes close, she will not die." Then from all parts came those who brought roses that bloomed in every garden, but they were not the right sort. The flower must be one from the garden of love, but which of the roses there showed forth the highest and purest love? The poet sang of this rose, the loveliest in the world, and each named one which he considered worthy of that title, and intelligence of what was required was sent far and wide to every heart that beat with love, to every class, age, and condition. "No one has yet named the flower," said the wise man. "No one has pointed out the spot where it blooms in all its splendor. It is not a rose from the coffin of Romeo and Juliet, or from the grave of Walberg, though these roses will live in everlasting song. It is not one of the roses which sprouted forth from the blood-stained fame of Winkelried, the blood which flows from the breast of a hero who dies for his country is sacred, and his memory is sweet, and no rose can be redder than the blood which flows from his veins. Neither is it the magic flower of science, to obtain which wondrous flower a man devotes many an hour of his fresh young life in sleepless nights in a lonely chamber." "I know where it blooms," said a happy mother, who came with her lovely child to the bedside of the queen. "I know where the loveliest rose in the world is. It is seen on the blooming cheeks of my sweet child, when it expresses the pure and holy love of infancy. When refreshed by sleep, it opens its eyes and smiles upon me with childlike affection." "This is a lovely rose," said the wise man, "but there is one still more lovely." "Yes, one far more lovely," said one of the women. "I have seen it, and a loftier and purer rose does not bloom. But it was white like the leaves of a blush rose. I saw it on the cheeks of the queen. She had taken off her golden crown, and through the long dreary night she carried her sick child in her arms. She wept over it, kissed it, and prayed for it as only a mother can pray in that hour of her anguish. Holy and wonderful in its might is the white rose of grief, but it is not the one we seek. "No, the loveliest rose in the world I saw at the Lord's table," said the good old bishop. "I saw it shine as if an angel's face had appeared. A young maiden knelt at the altar, and renewed the vows made at her baptism, and there were white roses and red roses on the blushing cheeks of that young girl. She looked up to heaven with all the purity and love of her young spirit, in all the expression of the highest and purest love. "May she be blessed," said the wise man. "But no one has yet named the loveliest rose in the world." Then there came into the room a child, the queen's little son. Tears stood in his eyes and glistened on his cheeks. He carried a great book, and the binding was of velvet with silver clasps. "Mother," cried the little boy, "only hear what I have read." And the child seated himself by the bedside and read from the book of him who suffered death on the cross to save all men, even who are yet unborn. He read, "Greater love hath no man than this," and as he read a roseate hue spread over the cheeks of the queen, and her eyes became so enlightened and clear that she saw from the leaves of the book a lovely rose spring forth, a type of him who shed his blood on the cross. "I see it," she said. "He who beholds this, the loveliest rose on earth, shall never die." The mail coach passengers. It was bitterly cold, the sky glittered with stars, and not a breeze stirred. Bump! An old pot was thrown at a neighbour's door, and bang, bang went the guns, for they were greeting the new year. It was New Year's Eve, and the church clock was striking 12. Tan-ta-ra-ra, tan-ta-ra-ra, sounded the horn, and the mail coach came lumbering up. The clumsy vehicle stopped at the gate of the town. All the places had been taken, for there were 12 passengers in the coach. "Hurrah! Hurrah!" cried the people in the town. For in every house the new year was being welcomed, and as the clock struck, they stood up, the full glasses in their hands, to drink success to the newcomer. "A happy new year," was the cry. "A pretty wife, plenty of money, and no sorrow or care." The wish passed round, and the glasses clashed together till they rang again. Why, before the town gate the mail coach stopped with the 12 strange passengers. And who were these strangers? Each of them had his passport and his luggage with him. They even brought presents for me, and for you, and for all the people in the town. Who were they? What did they want? And what did they bring with them? "Good morning," they cried to the sentry at the town gate. "Good morning," replied the sentry, for the clock had struck 12. "Your name and profession?" asked the sentry of the one who alighted first from the carriage. "See for yourself in the passport," he replied. "I am myself, and a famous fellow he looked, arrayed in bearskin and fur boots. I am the man on whom many persons fix their hopes. Come to me tomorrow, and I'll give you a New Year's present. I throw shillings and pence among the people. I give balls, no less than 31. Indeed, that is the highest number I can spare for balls. My ships are often frozen in, but in my offices it is warm and comfortable. My name is January. I'm a merchant, and I generally bring my accounts with me." Then the second alighted. He seemed a merry fellow. He was a director of a theatre, a manager of masked balls, and a leader of all the amusements we can imagine. His luggage consisted of a great cask. "We'll dance the bung out of the cask at carnival time," said he. "I'll prepare a merry tune for you, and for myself too. Unfortunately, I have not long to live. The shortest time, in fact, of my whole family, only 28 days. Sometimes they pop me in a day extra, but I trouble myself very little about that. Hurrah!" "You must not shout so," said the sentry. "Certainly I may shout," retorted the man. "I'm Prince Carnival, travelling under the name of February." The third now got out. He looked a personification of fasting, but he carried his nose very high, for he was related to the 40 Knights, and was a weather prophet. But that is not a very lucrative office, and therefore he praised fasting. In his buttonhole he carried a little bunch of violets. but they were very small. "March! March!" the fourth called after him, slapping him on the shoulder. "Don't you smell something? Make haste into the guardroom. They're drinking punch there."
"That's your favorite drink. I can smell it out here already."
"Forward, Master March." But it was not true. The speaker only wanted to remind him of his name, and to make an April fool of him, for with that fun the fourth generally began his career. He looked very jovial, did little work, and had the more holidays. "If the world were only a little more settled," said he. "But sometimes I'm obliged to be in a good humour, and sometimes a bad one, according to circumstances. Now rain, now sunshine. I'm kind of a house agent, also a manager of funerals. I can laugh or cry, according to circumstances. I have my summer wardrobe in this box here, but it would be very foolish to put it on now. Here I am. On Sundays I go out walking in shoes and white silk stockings and a muff." After him, a lady stepped out of the coach. She called herself Miss May. She wore a summer dress and overshoes. Her dress was a light green, and she wore anemones in her hair. She was so scented with wild thyme that it made the sentry sneeze. "Your health, and God bless you," was her salutation to him. How pretty she was, and such a singer! Not a theatre singer, nor a ballad singer, no, but a singer of the woods, for she wandered through the gay green forest and had a concert there for her own amusement. "Now comes the young lady," said those in the carriage, and out stepped a young dame, delicate, proud, and pretty. It was Mistress June, in whose service people become lazy and fond of sleeping for hours. She gives a feast on the longest day of the year, that there may be time for her guests to partake of the numerous dishes at her table. Indeed, she keeps her own carriage, but still she travelled by the mail, with the rest, because she wished to show that she was not high-minded. But she was not without a protector. Her younger brother, Julie, was with her. He was a plump young fellow, clad in summer garments and wearing a straw hat. He had but very little luggage with him, because it was so cumbersome in the great heat. He had, however, swimming trousers with him, which are nothing to carry. Then came the mother herself, in crinoline, Madame Auguste, a wholesale dealer in fruit, proprietress of a large number of fish ponds and a land cultivator. She was fat and heated, yet she could use her hands well, and would herself carry out beer to the labourers in the field. "In the sweat of the face shalt thou eat bread," said she. "It is written in the Bible." After work came the recreations, dancing and playing in the greenwood, and the harvest homes. She was a thorough housewife. After her, a man came out of the coach, who is a painter. He is the great master of colours, and is named Tember. The forest, on his arrival, had to change its colours when he wished it. And how beautiful are the colours he chooses! The woods glow with hues of red and gold and brown. This great master painter could whistle like a blackbird. He was quick in his work, and soon entwined the tendrils of the hop plant around his beer jug. This was an ornament to the jug, and he has a great love for ornament. There he stood, with his colour pot in his hand, and that was the whole of his luggage. A landowner followed, who in the month for sowing seed attended to the ploughing, and was fond of field sports. Squire OCTO brought his dog and his gun with him, and had nuts in his game bag. Crack, crack. He had a great deal of luggage, even an English plough. He spoke of farming, but what he said could scarcely be heard for the coughing and gasping of his neighbour. It was November, who coughed violently as he got out. He had a cold, which caused him to use his pocket handkerchief continually, and yet he said he was obliged to accompany servant girls to their new places and initiate them into their winter service. He said he thought his cold would never leave him when he went out wood-cutting, for he was a master sawyer and had to supply wood to the whole parish. He spent his evenings preparing wooden soles for skates, for he knew, he said, that in a few weeks these shoes would be wanted for the amusement of skating. At length the last passenger made her appearance, old Mother Dikembe with her fire-stool. The dame was very old, but her eyes glistened like 2 stars. She carried on her arm a flower-pot, in which a little fir tree was growing. "This tree I shall guard and cherish," she said, "that it may grow large by Christmas Eve and reach from the ground to the ceiling, to be covered and adorned with flaming candles, golden apples, and little figures. The fire-stool will be as warm as a stove, and I shall then bring a story-book out of my pocket and read aloud till all the children in the room are quite quiet. Then the little figures on the tree will become lively, and the little waxen angel at the top spread out his wings of gold leaf and fly down from his green perch. He will kiss everyone in the room, great and small, yes, even the poor children who stand in the passage or out in the street singing a carol about the Star of Bethlehem." "Well, now the coach may drive away," said the sentry. "We have the whole 12. Let the horses be put up." "First, let all the 12 come to me," said the captain on duty, "one after another. The passports I will keep here. Each of them is available for 1 month. When that has passed, I shall write the behavior of each on his passport. Mr. January, have the goodness to come here." And Mr. Staum, January, stepped forward. "When a year has passed, I think I shall be able to tell you what the 12 passengers have brought to you, to me, and to all of us. Now I do not know, and probably even they don't know themselves, for we live in strange times. The Meatle Pig." In the city of Florence, not far from the Piazza del Granduca, runs a little street called Porta Rossa. In this street, just in front of the marketplace, where vegetables are sold, stands a pig, made of brass and curiously formed. The bright colour has been changed by age to dark green, but clear. Fresh water pours from the snout, which shines as if it had been polished, and so indeed it has. For hundreds of poor people and children seize it in their hands as they place their mouths close to the mouth of the animal to drink. It is quite a picture to see a half-naked boy clasping the well-formed creature by the head as he presses his rosy lips against its jaws. Everyone who visits Florence can very quickly find the place. He has only to ask the first beggar he meets for the metal pig, and he will be told where it is. It was late on a winter evening. The mountains were covered with snow, but the moon shone brightly, and moonlight in Italy is like a dull winter's day in the north. Indeed, it is better, for clear air seems to raise us above the earth, while in the north a cold, grey, leaden sky appears to press us down to earth, even as the cold, damp earth shall one day press on us in the grave. In the garden of the Grand Duke's palace, under the roof of one of the wings, where 1,000 roses bloom in winter, a little ragged boy had been sitting the whole day long, a boy who might serve as a type of Italy, lovely and smiling, and yet still suffering. He was hungry and thirsty, yet no one gave him anything, and when it became dark and they were about to close the gardens, the porter turned him out. He stood a long time musing on the bridge which crosses the Arno, and looking at the glittering stars, reflected in the water which flowed between him and the elegant marble bridge, Della Trinita. He then walked away towards the metal pig, half knelt down, clasped it with his arms, and then put his mouth to the shining snout and drank deep draughts of the fresh water. Close by lay a few salad leaves and 2 chestnuts, which were to serve for his supper, No one was in the street but himself. It belonged only to him. So he boldly seated himself on the pig's back, leaned forward so that his curly head could rest on the head of the animal, and, before he was aware, he fell asleep. It was midnight. The metal pig raised himself gently, and the boy heard him say quite distinctly, "Hold tight, little boy, for I am going to run." And away he started for a most wonderful ride. First, they arrived at the Piazza del Granduca, and the metal horse which bears the Duke's statue neighed aloud. The painted coats of arms on the old council house shone like transparent pictures, and Michelangelo's David tossed his sling. It was as if everything had life. The metallic groups of figures, among which were Perseus and the Rape of the Sabines, looked like living persons, and cries of terror sounded from them all across the noble square. By the Palazzo degli Uffizi, in the arcade, where the nobility assemble for the carnival, the metal pig stopped. "Hold fast," said the animal. "Hold fast, for I am going upstairs." The little boy said not a word. He was half pleased and half afraid. They entered a long gallery where the boy had been before. The walls were resplendent with paintings. Here stood statues and busts, all in a clear light as if it were day. But the grandest appeared when the door of a side room opened. The little boy could remember what beautiful things he had seen there. But tonight everything shone in its brightest colors. Here stood the figure of a beautiful woman, as beautifully sculptured as possible by one of the great masters. Her graceful limbs appeared to move, dolphins sprang at her feet, and immortality shone from her eyes. The world called her the Venus de Medici. By her side were statues, in which the spirit of life breathed in stone, figures of men, one of whom whetted his sword and was named the Grinder. Wrestling gladiators formed another group. The sword had been sharpened for them, and they strove for the goddess of beauty. The boy was dazzled by so much glitter, for the walls were gleaming with bright colors, all appeared living reality. As they passed from hall to hall, beauty everywhere showed itself, and as the metal pig went step by step from one picture to the other, the little boy could see it all plainly. One glory eclipsed another, yet there was one picture that fixed itself on the little boy's memory, more especially because of the happy children it represented, for these the little boy had seen in daylight. Many passed this picture by with indifference, and yet it contains a treasure of poetic feeling. It represents Christ descending into Hades. They are not the lost whom the spectator sees, but the heathen of olden times. The Florentine Angiolo Bronzino painted this picture. Most beautiful is the expression on the face of the two children, who appear to have full confidence that they shall reach heaven at last. They are embracing each other, and one little one stretches out his hand towards another who stands below him and points to himself as if he were saying, "I am going to heaven." The older people stand as if uncertain, yet hopeful, and they bow in humble adoration to the Lord Jesus. On this picture, the boy's eyes rested longer than on any other. The metal pig stood still before it. A low sigh was heard. Did it come from the picture or from the animal? The boy raised his hands towards the smiling children, and then the pig ran off with him through the open vestibule. Thank you, you beautiful animal," said the little boy, caressing the metal pig as it ran down the steps. "Thanks to yourself also," replied the metal pig. "I have helped you, and you have helped me, for it is only when I have an innocent child on my back that I receive the power to run. Yes, as you see, I can even venture under the rays of the lamp in front of the picture of the Madonna, but I may not enter the church, still from without, and while you are upon my back, I may look in through the open door. Do not get down yet, for if you do, then I shall be lifeless, as you have seen me in the Porta Rossa." "I will stay with you, my dear creature," said the little boy. So then they went on at a rapid pace through the streets of Florence till they came to the square before the church of Santa Croce. The folding doors flew open, and light streamed from the altar through the church into the deserted square. A wonderful blaze of light streamed from one of the monuments in the left side aisle, and 1,000 moving stars seemed to form a glory round it. Even the coat of arms on the tombstone shone, and a red ladder on a blue field gleamed like fire. It was the grave of Galileo. The monument is unadorned, but the red ladder is an emblem of art, signifying that the way to glory leads up a shining ladder, on which the prophets of mind rise to heaven like Elias of old. In the right aisle of the church, every statue on the richly carved sarcophagi seemed endowed with life. Here stood Michelangelo, there Dante, with the laurel wreath round his brow, Alfieri and Machiavelli, for here side by side rest the great men, the pride of Italy. The church itself is very beautiful, even more beautiful than the marble cathedral at Florence, though not so large. It seemed as if the carved vestments stirred, and as if the marble figures they covered raised their heads higher, to gaze upon the brightly coloured glowing altar where the white-robed boys swung the golden censers amid music and song, while the strong fragrance of incense filled the church and streamed forth into the square. The boy stretched forth his hands towards the light, and at the same moment the metal pig started again so rapidly that he was obliged to cling tightly to him. The wind whistled in his ears. He heard the church door creak on its hinges as it closed, and it seemed to him as if he had lost his senses. Then a cold shudder passed over him, and he awoke. It was morning. The metal pig stood in its old place on the Porta Rosa, and the boy found he had slipped nearly off its back. Fear and trembling came upon him as he thought of his mother. She had sent him out the day before to get some money. He had not done so, and now he was hungry and thirsty. Once more he clasped the neck of his metal horse, kissed its nose, and nodded farewell to it. Then he wandered away into one of the narrowest streets, where there was scarcely room for a loaded donkey to pass. A great iron-bound door stood ajar. He passed through, and climbed up a brick staircase with dirty walls and a rope for a balustrade, till he came to an open gallery hung with rags. From here a flight of steps led down to a court, where from a well water was drawn up by iron rollers to the different stories of the house, and where the water buckets hung side by side. Sometimes the roller and the bucket danced in the air, splashing the water all over the court. Another broken-down staircase led from the gallery, and 2 Russian sailors running down it almost upset the poor boy. They were coming from their nightly carousal. A woman not very young, with an unpleasant face and a quantity of black hair, followed them. "What have you brought home?" she asked when she saw the boy. "Don't be angry," he pleaded. "I received nothing. I have nothing at all." And he seized his mother's dress and would have kissed it. Then they went into a little room. I need not describe it, but only say that there stood in it an earthen pot with handles, made for holding fire, which in Italy is called a marito. This pot she took in her lap, warmed her fingers, and pushed the boy with her elbow. "Certainly you must have some money," she said. The boy began to cry, and then she struck him with her foot till he cried out louder. "Will you be quiet, or I'll break your screaming head?" And she swung about the firepot which she held in her hand, while the boy crouched to the earth and screamed. Then a neighbour came in, and she had also a marito under her arm. "Felicita," she said, "what are you doing to the child?" "The child is mine," she answered. "I can murder him if I like." "And you too, Janina." And then she swung about the firepot. The other woman lifted up hers to defend herself, and the two pots clashed together so violently that they were dashed to pieces, and fire and ashes flew about the room. The boy rushed out at the sight, sped across the courtyard, and fled from the house. The poor child ran till he was quite out of breath. At last he stopped at the church, the doors of which were opened to him the night before, and went in. Here everything was bright, and the boy knelt down by the first tomb on his right, the grave of Michelangelo, and sobbed as if his heart would break. People came and went, mass was performed, but no one noticed the boy, excepting an elderly citizen, who stood still and looked at him for a moment, and then went away like the rest. Hunger and thirst overpowered the child, and he became quite faint and ill. At last he crept into a corner behind the marble monuments and went to sleep. Towards evening he was awakened by a pull at his sleeve. He started up, and the same old citizen stood before him. "Are you ill? Where do you live? Have you been here all day?" were some of the questions asked by the old man. After hearing his answers, the old man took him home to a small house close by, in a back street. They entered a glovemaker's shop, where a woman sat sewing busily. A little white poodle, so closely shaven that his pink skin could plainly be seen, frisked about the room and gambolled upon the boy. "Innocent souls are soon intimate," said the woman, as she caressed both the boy and the dog. These good people gave the child food and drink, and said he should stay with them all night, and that the next day the old man, who was called Giuseppe, would go and speak to his mother. A little homely bed was prepared for him, but to him who had so often slept on the hard stones it was a royal couch, and he slept sweetly and dreamed of the splendid pictures and of the metal pig. Giuseppe went out the next morning, and the poor child was not glad to see him go, for he knew that the old man was gone to his mother, and that, perhaps, he would have to go back. He wept at the thought, and then he played with the little lively dog and kissed it, while the old woman looked kindly at him to encourage him. And what news did Giuseppe bring back? At first the boy could not hear, for he talked a great deal to his wife, and she nodded and stroked the boy's cheek. Then she said, "He is a good lad. He shall stay with us. He may become a clever glove-maker like you. Look what delicate fingers he has got. Madonna intended him for a glove-maker." So the boy stayed with them, and the woman herself taught him to sew, and he ate well and slept well, and became very merry. But at last he began to tease Bellissima, as the little dog was called. This made the woman angry, and she scolded him and threatened him, which made him very unhappy, and he went and sat in his own room full of sad thoughts. This chamber looked upon the street, in which hung skins to dry, and there were thick iron bars across his window. That night he lay awake, thinking of the metal pig. Indeed, it was always in his thoughts. Suddenly he fancied he heard feet outside going pit-a-pat. He sprung out of bed and went to the window. Could it be the metal pig? But there was nothing to be seen. Whatever he had heard had passed already. Next morning, their neighbour, the artist, passed by, carrying a paint-box and a large roll of canvas. "Help the gentleman to carry his box of colours," said the woman to the boy, and he obeyed instantly, took the box, and followed the painter. They walked on till they reached the picture gallery, and mounted the same staircase up which he had ridden that night on the metal pig. He remembered all the statues and pictures, the beautiful marble, Venus, and again he looked at the Madonna with the Saviour and St. John. They stopped before the picture by Bronzino, in which Christ is represented as standing in the lower world, with the children smiling before him in the sweet expectation of entering heaven, and the poor boy smiled too, for here was his heaven. "You may go home now," said the painter, while the boy stood watching him till he had set up his easel. "May I see you paint?" asked the boy. "May I see you put the picture on this white canvas?" "I am not going to paint yet," replied the artist. Then he brought out a piece of chalk. His hand moved quickly, and his eye measured the great picture, and though nothing appeared but a faint line, the figure of the Saviour was as clearly visible as in the coloured picture. "Why don't you go?" said the painter. Then the boy wandered home silently, and seated himself on the table, and learned to sew gloves. But all day long his thoughts were in the picture gallery, and so he pricked his fingers and was awkward. But he did not tease Bellissima. When evening came and the house door stood open, he slipped out. It was a bright, beautiful, starlight evening, but rather cold. Away he went through the already deserted streets, and soon came to the metal pig. He stooped down and kissed its shining nose, and then seated himself on its back. "You happy creature," he said, "how I have longed for you! We must take a ride tonight." But the metal pig lay motionless, while the fresh stream gushed forth from its mouth. The little boy still sat astride on its back, when he felt something pulling at his clothes. He looked down, and there was Bellissima, little smooth-shaven Bellissima, barking as if she would have said, "Here I am too. Why are you sitting there?" A fiery dragon could not have frightened the little boy so much as did the little dog in this place. "Bellissima in the street, and not dressed," as the old lady called it. What would be the end of this? The dog never went out in winter, unless she was attired in a little lambskin coat which had been made for her. It was fastened round the little dog's neck and body with red ribbons, and was decorated with rosettes and little bells. The dog looked almost like a little kid when she was allowed to go out in winter and trot after her mistress. And now, here she was in the cold, and not dressed. Oh, how would it end? All his fancies were quickly put to flight, yet he kissed the metal pig once more, and then took Bellissima in his arms. The poor little thing trembled so with cold that the boy ran homeward as fast as he could. "What are you running away with there?" asked two of the police whom he met, and at whom the dog barked. "Where have you stolen that pretty dog?" they asked, and they took it away from him. "Oh, I have not stolen it. Do give it to me back again," cried the boy despairingly. "If you have not stolen it, you may say at home that they can send to the watch-house for the dog." Then they told him where the watch-house was, and went away with Bellissima. Here was a dreadful trouble. The boy did not know whether he had better jump into the Arno or go home and confess everything. They would certainly kill him, he thought. "Well, I would gladly be killed," he reasoned, "for then I shall die and go to heaven." And so he went home, almost hoping for death. The door was locked, and he could not reach the knocker. No one was in the street, so he took up a stone, and with it made a tremendous noise at the door. "Who is there?" asked somebody from within. "It is I," said he. "Bellissima is gone. Open the door, and then kill me." Then indeed there was a great panic. Madame was so very fond of Bellissima. She immediately looked at the wall where the dog's dress usually hung, and there was the little lambskin. "Bellissima in the watch-house!" she cried. "You bad boy, how did you entice her out? Poor little delicate thing, with those rough policemen. And she'll be frozen with cold." Giuseppe went off at once while his wife lamented, and the boy wept. Several of the neighbours came in, and amongst them the painter. He took the boy between his knees and questioned him, and, in broken sentences, he soon heard the whole story, and also about the metal pig, and the wonderful ride to the picture gallery, which was certainly rather incomprehensible. The painter, however, consoled the little fellow, and tried to soften the lady's anger, but she would not be pacified till her husband returned with Bellissima, who had been with the police. Then there was great rejoicing, and the painter caressed the boy, and gave him a number of pictures. "Oh, what beautiful pictures these were, figures with funny heads, and, above all, the metal pig was there too. Oh, nothing could be more delightful. By means of a few strokes, it was made to appear on the paper, and even the house that stood behind it had been sketched in. Oh, if he could only draw and paint! He who could do this could conjure all the world before him. The first leisure moment during the next day, the boy got a pencil, and on the back of one of the other drawings he attempted to copy the drawing of the metal pig, and he succeeded. Certainly it was rather crooked, rather up and down, one leg thick and another thin. Still, it was like the copy, and he was overjoyed at what he had done. The pencil would not go quite as it ought, he had found that out, but the next day he tried again. The second pig was drawn by the side of the first, and this looked 100 times better, and the third attempt was so good that everybody might know what it was meant to represent. And now the glove-making went on, but slowly. The orders given by the shops in the town were not finished quickly, for the metal pig had taught the boy that all objects may be drawn upon paper, and Florence is a picture book in itself for anyone who chooses to turn over its pages. On the Piazza del Trinita stands a slender pillar, and upon it is the goddess of justice, blindfolded, with her scales in her hand. She was soon represented on paper, and it was the glove-maker's boy who placed her there. His collection of pictures increased, but as yet they were only copies of lifeless objects, when one day Bellissima came gambolling before him. "Stand still," cried he, "and I will draw you beautifully to put amongst my collection." But Bellissima would not stand still, so she must be bound fast in one position. He tied her head and tail, but she barked and jumped, and so pulled and tightened the string that she was nearly strangled, and just then her mistress walked in. "You wicked boy!" the poor little creature, was all she could utter. She pushed the boy from her, thrust him away with her foot, called him a most ungrateful, good-for-nothing, wicked boy, and forbade him to enter the house again. Then she wept and kissed her little half-strangled Bellissima. At this moment the painter entered the room. In the year 1834 there was an exhibition in the Academy of Arts at Florence. 2 pictures, placed side by side, attracted a large number of spectators. The smaller of the 2 represented a little boy sitting at a table, drawing. Before him was a little white poodle, curiously shaven, but as the animal would not stand still, it had been fastened with a string to its head and tail to keep it in one position. The truthfulness and life in this picture interested everyone. The painter was said to be a young Florentine who had been found in the streets when a child by an old glove-maker who had brought him up. The boy had taught himself to draw. It was also said that a young artist, now famous, had discovered talent in the child just as he was about to be sent away for having tied up Madame's favourite little dog and using it as a model. The glove-maker's boy had also become a great painter, as the picture proved. But the larger picture by its side was a still greater proof of his talent. It represented a handsome boy, clothed in rags, lying asleep and leaning against the metal pig in the street of the Porta Rosa. All the spectators knew the spot well. The child's arms were round the neck of the pig, and he was in a deep sleep. The lamp before the picture of the Madonna threw a strong, effective light on the pale, delicate face of the child. It was a beautiful picture. A large gilt frame surrounded it, and on one corner of the frame a laurel wreath had been hung, but a black band twined unseen among the green leaves and a streamer of crape hung down from it. For within the last few days the young artist had died. The money box. In a nursery where a number of toys lay scattered about, a money box stood on the top of a very high wardrobe. It was made of clay in the shape of a pig and had been bought of the potter. In the back of the pig was a slit, and this slit had been enlarged with a knife, so that dollars or crown pieces might slip through, and indeed there were 2 in the box besides a number of pence. The money pig was stuffed so full that it could no longer rattle, which is the highest state of perfection to which a money pig can attain. There he stood upon the cupboard, high and lofty, looking down upon everything else in the room. He knew very well that he had enough inside him to buy up all the other toys, and this gave him a very good opinion of his own value. The rest thought of this fact also, although they did not express it, for there were so many other things to talk about. A large doll, still handsome, though rather old, for her neck had been mended, lay inside one of the drawers which was partly open. She called out to the others, "Let us have a game at being men and women. That is something worth playing at." Upon this there was a great uproar. Even the engravings, which hung in frames on the wall, turned round in their excitement and showed that they had a wrong side to them, although they had not the least intention to expose themselves in this way or to object to the game. It was late at night, but as the moon shone through the windows, they had light at a cheap rate. And as the game was now to begin, all were invited to take part in it, even the children's wagon, which certainly belonged to the coarser playthings. "Each has its own value," said the wagon. "We cannot all be noblemen. There must be some to do the work." The money pig was the only one who received a written invitation. He stood so high that they were afraid he would not accept a verbal message. But in his reply he said, if he had to take a part, he must enjoy the sport from his own home. They were to arrange for him to do so, and so they did. The little toy theatre was therefore put up in such a way that the money pig could look directly into it. Some wanted to begin with a comedy, and afterwards to have a tea party and a discussion for mental improvement, but they commenced with the latter first. The rocking horse spoke of training and races, the wagon of railways and steam power, for these subjects belonged to each of their professions, and it was right they should talk of them. The clock talked politics. Tick, tick. He professed to know what was the time of day, but there was a whisper that he did not go correctly. The bamboo cane stood by. Looking stiff and proud, he was vain of his brass ferrule and silver top, and on the sofa lay 2 worked cushions, pretty but stupid. When the play at the little theatre began, the rest sat and looked on. They were requested to applaud and stamp or crack when they felt gratified with what they saw. But the riding whip said he never cracked for old people, only for the young who were not yet married. "I crack for everybody," said the cracker. "Yes, and a fine noise you make," thought the audience as the play went on. It was not worth much, but it was very well played, and all the characters turned their painted sides to the audience, for they were made only to be seen on one side. The acting was wonderful, excepting that sometimes they came out beyond the lamps because the wires were a little too long. The doll, whose neck had been darned, was so excited that the place in her neck burst, and the money pig declared he must do something for one of the players, as they had all pleased him so much. So he made up his mind to remember one of them in his will, as the one to be buried with him in the family vault, whenever that event should happen. They all enjoyed the comedy so much that they gave up all thoughts of the tea party, and only carried out their idea of intellectual amusement, which they called playing at men and women, and there was nothing wrong about it, for it was only play. All the while, each one thought most of himself, or of what the money pig could be thinking. His thoughts were on, as he supposed, a very distant time, of making his will, and of his burial, and of when it might all come to pass. Certainly sooner than he expected, for all at once down he came from the top of the press, fell on the ground, and was broken to pieces. Then the pennies hopped and danced about in the most amusing manner. The little ones twirled round like tops, and the large ones rolled away as far as they could, especially the one great silver-crowned piece, who had often to go out into the world, and now he had his wish as well as all the rest of the money. The pieces of the money pig were thrown into the dustbin, and the next day there stood a new money pig on the cupboard, but it had not a farthing in its inside yet, and therefore, like the old one, it could not rattle. This was the beginning with him, and we will make it the end of our story. The Nietzsche families. One would have thought that something important was going on in the duck pond, but it was nothing after all. All the ducks lying quietly on the water or standing on their heads in it, for they could do that, at once swarmed to the sides. The traces of their feet were seen in the wet earth, and their cackling was heard far and wide. The water, which a few moments before had been as clear and smooth as a mirror, became very troubled. Before, every tree, every neighbouring bush, the old farmhouse with the holes in the roof and the swallow's nest, and especially the great rose bush full of flowers, had been reflected in it. The rose bush covered the wall and hung out over the water, in which everything was seen as if in a picture, except that it all stood on its head. But when the water was troubled, everything got mixed up, and the picture was gone. 2 feathers which the fluttering ducks had lost floated up and down. Suddenly they took a rush, as if the wind were coming, but as it did not come, they had to lie still, and the water once more became quiet and smooth. The roses were again reflected. They were very beautiful, but they did not know it, for no one had told them. The sun shone among the delicate leaves. Everything breathed forth the loveliest fragrance, and all felt as we do when we are filled with joy at the thought of our happiness. "How beautiful existence is," said each rose. "The only thing that I wish for is to be able to kiss the sun, because it is so warm and bright. I should also like to kiss those roses down in the water, which are so much like us, and the pretty little birds down in the nest. There are some up above too. They put out their heads and pipe softly. They have no feathers like their father and mother. We have good neighbours, both below and above. How beautiful existence is! The young ones above and below, those below were really only shadows in the water, were sparrows. Their parents were sparrows too, and had taken possession of the empty swallow's nest of last year, and now lived in it as if it were their own property. "Are those the ducks' children swimming here?" asked the young sparrows when they saw the feathers on the water. "If you must ask questions, ask sensible ones," said their mother. "Don't you see that they are feathers, such as I wear, and you will wear too? But ours are finer. Still, I should like to have them up in the nest, for they keep one warm. I am very curious to know what the ducks were so startled about. Not about us, certainly, although I did say peeps to you pretty loudly. The thick-headed roses ought to know why, but they know nothing at all. They only look at themselves and smell. I am heartily tired of such neighbours." "Listen to the dear little birds up there," said the roses. "They begin to want to sing too, but are not able to manage it yet. But it will soon come. What a pleasure that must be! It is fine to have such cheerful neighbours." Suddenly 2 horses came galloping up to be watered. A peasant boy rode on one, and he had taken off all his clothes except his large, broad black hat. The boy whistled like a bird and rode into the pond where it was deepest, and as he passed the rose bush he plucked a rose and stuck it in his hat. Now he looked dressed and rode on. The other roses looked after their sister, and asked each other, "Where can she be going to?" But none of them knew. "I should like to go out into the world for once," said one, "but here at home among our green leaves it is beautiful too. The whole day long the sun shines bright and warm, and in the night the sky shines more beautifully still. We can see that through all the little holes in it." They meant the stars, but they knew no better. "We make it lively about the house," said the sparrow mother, "and people say that a swallow's nest brings luck, so they are glad of us." "But such neighbors as ours! A rose bush on the wall like that causes damp. I dare say it will be taken away. Then we shall perhaps have some corn growing here. The roses are good for nothing but to be looked at and to be smelt, or at most to be stuck in a hat. Every year, as I have been told by my mother, they fall off. The farmer's wife preserves them and strews salt among them. Then they get a French name, which I neither can pronounce nor care to, and are put into the fire to make a nice smell. You see, that's their life. They exist only for the eye and the nose. Now you know." In the evening, when the gnats were playing about in the warm air and in the red clouds, the nightingale came and sang to the roses that the beautiful was like sunshine to the world, and that the beautiful lived forever. The roses thought that the nightingale was singing about itself, and that one might easily have believed. They had no idea that the song was about them, but they were very pleased with it and wondered whether all the little sparrows could become nightingales. "I understand the song of that bird very well," said the young sparrows. "There was only one word that was not clear to me. What does the beautiful mean?" "Nothing at all," answered their mother. "That's only something external." Up at the hall, where the pigeons have their own house, and corn and peas are strewn before them every day, I have dined with them myself, and that you shall do in time too. For tell me what company you keep, and I'll tell you who you are. Up at the hall they have two birds with green necks and a crest upon their heads. They can spread out their tails like a great wheel, and these are so bright with various colors that it makes one's eyes ache. These birds are called peacocks, and that is the beautiful. If they were only plucked a little, they would look no better than the rest of us. I would have plucked them already if they had not been so big." "I'll pluck them," piped the young sparrow, who had no feathers yet. In the farmhouse lived a young married couple. They loved each other dearly, were industrious and active, and everything in their home looked very nice. On Sundays the young wife came down early, plucked a handful of the most beautiful roses, and put them into a glass of water, which she placed upon the cupboard. "Now I see that it is Sunday," said the husband, kissing his little wife. They sat down, read their hymn book, and held each other by the hand, while the sun shone down upon the fresh roses and upon them. "This sight is really too tedious," said the sparrow mother, who could see into the room from her nest, and she flew away. The same thing happened on the following Sunday, for every Sunday fresh roses were put into the glass, but the rose bush bloomed as beautifully as ever. The young sparrows now had feathers, and wanted very much to fly with their mother, but she would not allow it, and so they had to stay at home. In one of her flights, however it may have happened, she was caught, before she was aware of it, in a horsehair net which some boys had attached to a tree. The horsehair was drawn tightly round her leg, as tightly as if the latter were to be cut off. She was in great pain and terror. The boys came running up and seized her, and in no gentle way either. "It's only a sparrow," they said. They did not, however, let her go, but took her home with them, and every time she cried, they hit her on the beak. In the farmhouse was an old man who understood making soap into cakes and balls, both for shaving and washing. He was a merry old man, always wandering about. On seeing the sparrow which the boys had brought, and which they said they did not want, he asked, "Shall we make it look very pretty?" At these words an icy shudder ran through the sparrow mother. Out of his box, in which were the most beautiful colors, the old man took a quantity of shining leaf gold, while the boys had to go and fetch some white of egg with which the sparrow was to be smeared all over. The gold was stuck onto this, and the sparrow mother was now gilded all over. But she, trembling in every limb, did not think of the adornment. Then the soapman tore off a small piece from the red lining of his old jacket, and cutting it so as to make it look like a cock's comb, he stuck it to the bird's head. "Now you will see the gold jacket fly," said the old man, letting the sparrow go, which flew away in deadly fear, with the sun shining upon her. How she glittered! All the sparrows, and even a crow, and an old boy he was too, were startled at the sight. But still they flew after her to learn what kind of strange bird she was. Driven by fear and horror, she flew homeward. She was almost sinking, fainting to the earth, while the flock of pursuing birds increased, some even attempting to peck at her. "Look at her! Look at her!" they all cried. "Look at her! Look at her!" cried her little ones as she approached the nest. "That is certainly a young peacock, for it glitters in all colors. It makes one's eyes ache, as mother told us. Peep! That's the beautiful." And then they pecked at the bird with their little beaks so that it was impossible for her to get into the nest. She was so exhausted that she couldn't even say, "Peep," much less, "I am your own mother." The other birds, too, now fell upon the sparrow and plucked off feather after feather until she fell bleeding into the rose bush. "Poor creature," said all the roses, "only be still, and we will hide you. Lean your little head against us." The sparrow spread out her wings once more, then drew them closely to her, and lay dead near the neighboring family, the beautiful fresh roses. "Peep!" sounded from the nest. "Where can mother be so long? It's more than I can understand. It cannot be a trick of hers, and mean that we are now to take care of ourselves. She has left us the house as an inheritance, but to which of us is it to belong when we have families of our own? Yes, it won't do for you to stay with me when I increase my household with a wife and children," said the smallest. "I dare say I shall have more wives and children than you," said the second. "But I am the eldest," exclaimed the third. Then they all got excited. They hit out with their wings, pecked with their beaks, and flop! One after another was thrown out of the nest. There they lay with their anger, holding their heads on one side and blinking the eye that was turned upwards. That was their way of looking foolish. They could fly a little. By practice they learned to improve, and at last they agreed upon a sign by which to recognize each other if they should meet in the world later on. It was to be one peep and 3 scratches on the ground with the left foot. The young one, who had remained behind in the nest, made himself as broad as he could, for he was the proprietor, but this greatness did not last long. In the night, the red flames burst through the window and seized the roof. The dry straw blazed up high, and the whole house, together with the young sparrow, was burned. The 2 others, who wanted to marry, thus saved their lives by a stroke of luck. When the sun rose again, and everything looked as refreshed as if it had had a quiet sleep, there only remained of the farmhouse a few black charred beams leaning against the chimney, which was now its own master. Thick smoke still rose from the ruins, but the rosebush stood yonder, fresh, blooming, and untouched, every flower and every twig being reflected in the clear water. "How beautifully the roses bloom before the ruined house!" exclaimed a passer-by. "A pleasanter picture cannot be imagined. I must have that." And the man took out of his portfolio a little book with white leaves. He was a painter, and with his pencil he drew the smoking house, the charred beams, and the overhanging chimney, which bent more and more. In the foreground he put the large blooming rosebush, which presented a charming view. For its sake alone, the whole picture had been drawn. Later in the day, the 2 sparrows who had been born there came by. "Where is the house?" they asked. "Where is the nest?" "Peep!" "All is burned, and our strong brother too." That's what he has now for keeping the nest. The roses got off very well. There they still stand with their red cheeks. They certainly do not mourn at their neighbours' misfortunes. I don't want to talk to them, and it looks miserable here. That's my opinion. And away they went. On a beautiful sunny autumn day, one could almost have believed it was still the middle of summer. They hopped about in the dry, clean-swept courtyard before the principal entrance of the hall. A number of black, white, and gaily coloured pigeons, all shining in the sunlight. The pigeon mothers said to their young ones, stand in groups, for that looks much better." "What kind of creatures are those little grey ones that run about behind us?" asked an old pigeon with red and green in her eyes. Little grey ones, she cried. "They are sparrows and good creatures. We have always had the reputation of being pious, so we will allow them to pick up the corn with us. They don't interrupt our talk, and they scrape so prettily when they bow." Indeed, they were continually making 3-foot scrapings with the left foot, and also said, "Peep!" By this means they recognized each other, for they were the sparrows from the nest on the burned house. "Here is excellent fare," said the sparrow. The pigeons strutted round one another, puffed out their chests mightily, and had their own private views and opinions. "Do you see that pouter pigeon?" said one to the other. "Do you see how she swallows the peas? She eats too many, and the best ones too. Coo-roo, coo-roo! How she lifts her crest, the ugly, spiteful creature. Coo-roo, coo-roo!" And the eyes of all sparkled with malice. Stand in groups, little grey ones, coo-roo, coo-roo, coo-roo." So their chatter ran on, and so it will run on for thousands of years. The sparrows ate lustily. They listened attentively, and even stood in the ranks with the others, but it did not suit them at all. They were full, and so they left the pigeons, exchanging opinions about them, slipped in under the garden palings, and when they found the door leading into the house open, one of them, who was more than full, and therefore felt brave, hopped onto the threshold. "Peep," said he, "I may venture that." "Peep," said the other, "so may I, and something more too." And he hopped into the room. No one was there. The 3rd sparrow, seeing this, flew still farther into the room, exclaiming, "All or nothing. It is a curious man's nest all the same. And what have they put up here? What is it?" Close to the sparrows the roses were blooming. They were reflected in the water, and the charred beams leaned against the overhanging chimney. "Do tell me what this is. How comes this in a room at the hall?" And all 3 sparrows wanted to fly over the roses and the chimney, but flew against a flat wall. It was all a picture, a great splendid picture, which the artist had painted from a sketch. "Peep," said the sparrows, "it's nothing, it only looks like something." "Peep." That is the beautiful. Do you understand it? I don't, and they flew away, for some people came into the room. Days and years went by. The pigeons had often cooed, not to say growled, the spiteful creatures. The sparrows had been frozen in winter, and had lived merrily in summer. They were all betrothed, or married, or whatever you like to call it. They had little ones, and of course each one thought his own, the handsomest and cleverest. One flew this way, another that, and when they met, they recognized each other by their peep and the 3 scrapes with the left foot. The eldest had remained an old maid, and had no nest nor young ones. It was her pet idea to see a great city, so she flew to Copenhagen. There was a large house painted in many gay colours, standing close to the castle and the canal, upon which latter were to be seen many ships laden with apples and pottery. The windows of the house were broader at the bottom than at the top, and when the sparrows looked through them, every room appeared to them like a tulip with the brightest colours and shades. But in the middle of the tulip stood white men, made of marble. A few were of plaster, still, looked at with sparrows' eyes, that comes to the same thing. Up on the roof stood a metal chariot drawn by metal horses, and the goddess of victory, also of metal, was driving. It was Thorwaldsen's museum. "How it shines, how it shines," said the maiden sparrow. "I suppose that is the beautiful." Peep! But here it is larger than a peacock. She still remembered what, in her childhood's days, her mother had looked upon as the greatest among the beautiful. She flew down into the courtyard. There everything was extremely fine. Palms and branches were painted on the walls, and in the middle of the court stood a great blooming rose tree, spreading out its fresh boughs, covered with roses, over a grave. Thither flew the maiden sparrow, for she saw several of her own kind there, a peep, and 3-foot scrapings. In this way she had often greeted throughout the year, and no one here had responded, for those who are once parted do not meet every day, and so this greeting had become a habit with her. But today 2 old sparrows and a young one answered with a peep, and the thrice-repeated scrape with the left foot. "Ah, good day, good day." They were 2 old ones from the nest, and a little one of the family. "Do we meet here? It's a grand place, but there's not much to eat. This is the beautiful peep." Many people came out of the side rooms where the beautiful marble statues stood and approached the grave where lay the great master who had created these works of art. All stood with enraptured faces round Thorwaldsen's grave, and a few picked up the fallen rose leaves and preserved them. They had come from afar, one from mighty England, others from Germany and France. The fairest of the ladies plucked one of the roses and hid it in her bosom. Then the sparrows thought that the roses reigned here, and that the house had been built for their sake. That appeared to them to be really too much, but since all the people showed their love for the roses, they did not wish to be behindhand. "Peep," they said, sweeping the ground with their tails and blinking with one eye at the roses. They had not looked at them long before they were convinced that they were their old neighbours. And so they really were. The painter who had drawn the rose bush near the ruined house had afterwards obtained permission to dig it up, and had given it to the architect, for finer roses had never been seen. The architect had planted it upon Thorwaldsen's grave, where it bloomed as an emblem of the beautiful, and yielded fragrant red rose leaves to be carried as mementos to distant lands. "Have you obtained an appointment here in the city?" asked the sparrows. The roses nodded. They recognized their grey neighbours, and were pleased to see them again. "How glorious it is to live and to bloom, to see old friends again, and happy faces every day. It is as if every day were a festival." "Peep," said the sparrows. "Yes, they are really our old neighbours. We remember their origin near the pond. Peep, how they have got on." "Yes, some succeed while they are asleep." "Ah, there's a faded leaf. I can see that quite plainly." And they pecked at it till it fell off. But the tree stood there fresher and greener than ever. The roses bloomed in the sunshine on Thorwaldsen's grave and became associated with his immortal name,